Chapter 1. Loren Morgan, November 1981, Hampshire, England. The street outside the cinema was alive with people. Vendors lined the pavement, calling to passers-by and hoping for last-minute sales. Cream puffs for a child, a hair tie, a paper cone of chips. Near the far end of the street, a small family of 3 lingered, still smiling from their afternoon out. "It was a perfect day, Miss Maggie. Perhaps I could invite you to spend next weekend with me," the young man said, cradling the baby in his arms. He was in his 20s, handsome, and a smile twitched permanently at the corners of his mouth. Mr. Morgan, that's tempting. I'll think about it," the woman answered. She finished the last cream puff, then linked her arm through the man's and nudged his sleeve when he wasn't looking. They exchanged a look and laughed together. The child in the man's arms, Loren, watched them, a little world-weary. He had an adult's memories in a 1-year-old's body, and scenes like this, over and over since he'd woken in this life, were almost sickeningly sweet. He pout-hummed around a milk sugar and shifted to get comfortable, ready to doze again. Then a voice cut through the laughter. "Peter, you will pay for this." The shout came from behind the couple and carried a terrible fury that made everyone flinch. A short, stout man in a gray suit darted out and ran past the pair toward the corner of the street. A tall, gaunt man with a disheveled beard and wild, bloodshot eyes stood where the shout had come from, clutching a thin wooden cane. The bearded man's glare burned with hate. Confusion rippled through the couple. They stepped back instinctively. Loren felt something cold and wrong run up his spine. Panic prickled at the back of his neck, and his heart hammered in his small chest. "Run!" he gurgled. There was no time. A shockwave detonated from the corner with the force of a small quake. Brick and mortar exploded outward. Earth and paving stone heaved apart as if something underground had forced its way up. In an instant, Loren saw his father push him protectively toward his mother. His mother bundled him beneath her skirt. Their sky-blue dress filled his vision. Something blue flared in Loren's eyes, light pouring out from his pupils, washing over the black irises. For a single, terrible moment, the child's gaze burned with a color no infant should have. A nearby man, Sirius Black, glanced aside, taken aback to see such raw magical power in someone so young, but there was no time to react. The man who had shouted collapsed. They said later it was Peter Pettigrew. Warm stickiness soaked into Loren's clothes. He lost consciousness. Cornelius Fudge, pinstripes neat despite the carnage around him, stared at the ruined street and said, voice tight, "This is monstrous, Crouch. That Death Eater has blown up an entire street. 12 muggles dead, and Pettigrew, he's almost." He swallowed. There was a look of paled, furious disbelief in his eyes. "He's practically gone." Sirius Black stood amid the wreckage, a strange, hollow laugh escaping him. Beside him, Barty Crouch was immaculate despite the long, sleepless hours, tie straight, hair in place. They had all been working since the events of yesterday. Exhaustion showed on no one's face, but was written in every movement. Crouch's jaw was locked. Fudge, distressed but dutiful, forced himself back to the business at hand. "Handle this under the International Statute of Secrecy," Fudge ordered, regaining control. "Contact the Muggle authorities. Arrange compensation for the families. Least we can do. Aurors, start the memory charms. Move quickly." The Aurors set to work methodically. For a few of them, there was grim relief. Lord Voldemort had fallen. Perhaps the worst was over. For everyone else, there was only the work of cleaning up horror and hiding it from the world. June 1985, Sir Hillier Children's Welfare Home, Hampshire. 5-year-old Loren Morgan was sorting donated clothes with Sister Joyce. Older children were assigned lighter chores. Doing them properly made it more likely the staff would think well of you and perhaps improve a child's chances of being adopted. "Sister Joyce, when will Mr. Thorne come back?" Loren asked. He missed Mr. Thorne, the cafeteria manager who sometimes slipped him an extra portion. Since Thorne left, Loren had often felt faint and lightheaded. He guessed it was anemia from too little food. At the name, Joyce's face hardened for a moment before she softened. "He's gone away for good, dear. He won't be working here anymore." Loren blinked, disappointed. The reliable source of extra food was gone. "So, no potatoes tonight?" He'd eaten more potatoes in these last few years than in any lifetime before. The idea of yet another potato meal was wearying. Joyce smiled, trying to reassure him. Perhaps we'll cook them differently. Have you any ideas? Loren frowned and didn't answer. Joyce watched him, small, solemn, with blue, limpid eyes and a frown like a worried adult, and felt a fondness that made her chest hurt a little. People from the church and the council are here today, talking with Miss Maggie, she added. Maybe we'll have something better. Before she could say more, there was a knock at the reception room door. A woman's voice called out, bright and eager. Joyce, bring Loren, there's good news. Joyce and Loren hurried to the reception. Miss Maggie, the welfare home's matron, met them there. She was 40, brisk in manner, and already on her feet to greet the visitors. Two men rose when they saw the child, one in a white deacon's robe, the other in a black overcoat. Miss Maggie introduced them. This is Deacon Thorne from the church and Mr. Pino from the municipal office. There was no time for formalities. Mr. Pino spoke first, businesslike. We don't have much time. Last week, while we were updating the household records, we found a living relative, Loren's mother's uncle. We called him. He's agreed to take the child. Deacon Thorne nodded. We'll process the papers straight away. We'll escort him tomorrow morning. He'll only be away a short while. Joyce threw her arms around Loren. That's wonderful, she murmured, eyes bright. After years in the home, perhaps God had finally answered this child's prayers. Loren felt unsettlingly unmoored. He had been in the welfare home for as long as he could remember. Miss Maggie, Sister Joyce, the smell of the kitchen, Mr. Thorne's tuck-shop treats. When he was older, Miss Maggie had told him his parents had died in an accident. Loren had always felt that something about that didn't fit, but he had no memories before waking in this place. Now, the sudden prospect of leaving left him anxious. Miss Maggie told Joyce and Loren to pack a few things. She would stay to finalize the paperwork with Mr. Pino and the deacon. The next morning, Joyce stood outside the waiting car, watching the small figure in the back as the engine idled. She handed Loren a small bundle wrapped in white cloth, some spare clothes, and a few small belongings. Come back and visit when you're older, Loren, she said, pressing a kiss to his forehead. Loren felt his cheeks warm and nodded. Cheer up, lad. We've a long drive, Mr. Pino said cheerfully from the front seat. The light blue Ford Anglia rolled away down the road. Joyce watched the car's black dot shrink on the horizon, reluctant to let go. Is Loren really going to his relatives? She asked Miss Maggie once the car had gone. Miss Maggie sighed. I don't know the full details, Joyce. The council handled it. They say he'll be properly cared for. As for Thorne, she trailed off, a bitter look passing her face. He deserved to be punished, Joyce said, remembering the things that had come to light about the cafeteria manager. She looked after the vanishing car until it was only a speck, and then turned to go back into the quiet of the home. Chapter 2. Grandpa Bates, Who Lives in the Mountains. The town was picturesque, tucked at the foot of high, quiet mountains. Peaks rose above green valleys, and a narrow path led from behind the town, winding up into the hills. Wilderness filled the view. Nameless wildflowers softened the air, and the scent of blooms drifted off the pastures. Deacon Thorne held Loren's hand in one strong grip and carried a parcel in the other. Your grandfather, Mr. Bates, lives up on the mountain pasture, Thorne said. He keeps a few sheep for the townsfolk and grows some wheat. You'll be able to make a decent living here. Loren nodded, looking down and drawing a shaky breath. He wore 2 layers of smock and heavy hobnailed boots, things from the orphanage that Joyce had insisted he take. The sun had burned his cheeks as he climbed, and the climb made him pant. Even after several years since he had transmigrated, this body felt small and underdeveloped. Both his limbs and his head seemed too weak for much. Britain in the 1980s wasn't kind to an orphan. The streets were full of drug dealers, thieves, idle youths, and skinheads. A child couldn't afford many small misfortunes. He was no more than 5 in this body, so most of his ambitions felt unreachable. The townspeople watched the pair walk up the path with mixed curiosity and fear, whispering among themselves. The two paid them no mind. Once they left the last houses behind, Loren could no longer stand the heat. He wrenched his hand free from Thorne, tore off the outer smock so he was left with only one thin layer, kicked off the hobnailed boots, wrapped them in the smock, and tried standing barefoot. The path had flat stones. The coolness felt good. Come on, Mr. Thorne, I can keep up, Loren said, suddenly feeling lighter. Thorne smiled. He let go only when the slope grew steep and he needed both hands to steady the boy. After about an hour, they reached the high mountain pasture. 3 small thatched cottages squatted on a wind-swept rise, full in the sun and looking down over the valley. A roughly nailed bench ran along the cottage wall, and on it an old man sat smoking a pipe, watching the 2 figures draw near. He had a long beard, gray-white brows, and deep wrinkles etched into his forehead. Thorn stepped forward and offered his hand. "Hello, Mr. Bates. I'm Thorn." "Hello," the old man grunted, shaking it and eyeing them. When he looked at the small child, no bigger than a bean, with grass-like lashes throwing shadows over sky-blue eyes, something in him softened. Loren noticed the attention and seized the chance. "Hello, grandfather," he said. He didn't ask for much, only a place to get on his feet until he could fend for himself. Thorn told Loren to set the parcel down and rest while he spoke with Mr. Bates. Loren put the bundle on a stand beside the cottage and took in the scene: bright sun, fragrant plants, a peaceful sweep of pasture and sky. Soon Thorn left down the mountain, their handover complete. "Come inside. We'll tidy the attic if you're going to live here," Mr. Bates called from the doorway. The cottage had 1 room. A narrow bed, a table with a few chairs, a cupboard against the wall, and a stove in the corner with a large pot simmering. A stack of wood led up to a ladder and the attic above. Loren shoved his bundle and the extra smock into the cupboard. In the attic, Mr. Bates had already laid out a coarse sheeted pallet stuffed with cotton batting. It was rough, but more than adequate for summer. "Later, I'll make you a proper bed frame," the old man said. "Just make do for now." That evening, at the wooden table, wheat cooked in goat's milk scented the room with a wholesome aroma. Smoked lamb tasted rich and savory. A sip of goat's milk smoothed out the faint gaminess. A small plate of wild berries, some sour, some sweet, sat between them. Loren copied the old man, scooping a handful and popping them in his mouth. After years of orphanage food where potatoes came in every style, this simple country meal felt sublime. When Loren moved to clear the table, Bates stopped him. "Boy, just live. Some things can wait until you're older," he said, then carried the dishes outside to wash them himself. "Okay, grandfather," Loren answered, comforted. Even in this lean country life, it felt warmer than the orphanage. That night in the attic, he fell asleep to the scent of green grass. He dreamed he rode the wind through valleys and over streams, along treetops and clouds. The dizziness eased, and he slept deeper than he had in years. Sunlight woke him the next morning. Bates wanted to build a simple bed frame in the attic and clear away clutter, so he told Loren to go up the mountain with Pete, the goat herder. Pete was a 10-year-old boy who drove the town's sheep up each day to graze. He was as annoyed as any child at having to mind a flock alone. Learning he'd get company sent him bright-eyed with excitement. They walked the winding trail and let the sheep roam the hillsides. Pete and Loren spent the day roughhousing, rolling down soft slopes, watching eagles drive rabbits onto rocks, and sampling bright wild berries along the way. Loren reveled in the freedom. The orphanage had never let him be this wild, never let him forget about safety or rules. When dusk came, Pete used his whip to drive the sheep down the mountain. Bates, carrying salt, led his few animals into the fold, while Pete headed back to the town, whistling to call the other children and gather each household's flock. Mountain life was poor and simple, but it was honest and natural. Loren settled in and began to know the townsfolk. Their looks were always oddly sympathetic, as if he were marked by some misfortune. Yet whenever Bates appeared, they grew somber and distant, approaching with a blend of reverence and fear. Pete told Loren the village rumors. They said Mr. Bates had killed people, made pacts with devils, and brought bad luck. None of the stories seemed believable. Bates often went alone into the mountains each full moon and returned the next morning, pale and feeble, avoiding physical labor for days. When Loren asked, Bates would only say he was checking fruit trees and needed a few days to rest his old bones. He never took Loren along on those trips. Note: the character of Grandfather Bates appears here mainly as an introduction. He has his own backstory. His solitary life on the high mountain is tied to a werewolf connection. The casting in Little Heidi featured Gons as the grandfather and Peter as the goat herder. Keeping that likeness here is a small Easter egg I couldn't quite let go of. If that distracts any readers, I apologize. 3. The Weird Old Man and Two Books. Winter had come around again, and Loren Morgan was 10 years old. Heavy snow blanketed the hills, tree branches bowed under the weight, and thatched roofs disappeared beneath white drifts. Pete no longer herded sheep, and everyone had put by food for the season and fodder for the animals. The people lower down the mountain stayed home to do craft work to sell in town and to buy the things they needed. When the sun shone, Mr. Bates wouldn't let Loren climb the mountain, warning that the glare might damage his eyes. When he had nothing else to do, Loren hunted small creatures in the woods and foraged for winter edibles, but more often he went to school. Mr. Bates had put aside some old textbooks and a dictionary, and Loren read them whenever he grew bored. He helped the teacher and the church folk copy documents and letters, and he picked up the material quickly. Mr. Bates liked to tell anyone who would listen that Loren would grow up to do great things. The school was in the little town down the hill. Every morning, Mr. Bates sledded Loren down to class, and each evening he carried the boy home on his back. The days slid past like that. On Christmas Eve, a traveling band came through town to perform. Loren and Pete decided to go. Red ribbons and strings of small colored lights hung on trees along the road. Festive music floated out from shop doorways. Restaurants and pubs were crowded, the warm yellow light making everyone feel cozy. Pete and Loren wore thick wool jumpers and sheepskin coats, each with a gray and white striped scarf. Loren kept his hands in his pockets, while Pete munched roasted sweet potatoes from a street stall. This band's odd, Loren thought as they walked. They're called the Norns, but it's all blokes on stage. He'd expected more of a raucous rock show, but the name, taken from the Old Norse fates, felt odd for an all-male group. Who cares? Pete shrugged. As long as it's fun. He leaned in. The performance starts soon. There's a little market over there. Want to look? Loren had some pocket money saved and was curious. You saved me a spot, he told Pete. I'll have a quick look. The market was little more than a few stalls pitched in an alley behind the hall, set up for the rare bustle in town. There were wool socks and gloves, painted eggs, matryoshka dolls, and all manner of odd trinkets. Loren even saw a Chinese 9-linked puzzle. He wandered without real intention to buy, just to look. At a corner, he noticed an old man seated alone, thin and white-haired, neatly dressed, sipping a steaming cup of coffee. On the ground before him lay a fur blanket with 2 large books upon it. Passers-by and stallholders seemed not to notice him. Loren, curious, approached. "Hello, sir. May I look at those books?" he asked. The old man glanced up, surprised by the child's voice. Loren studied his sunken eyes. The color was hard to name, as if some ancient, secret kind of light flickered in them. "Of course," the man said with an almost indifferent smile. "They're for sale." Loren crouched and turned the pages. One book was titled An Explanation of Hieroglyphic Symbols. Thicker than a dictionary, it looked hand-copied in tidy script on a parchment-like material. The other had no title. When Loren touched it, a strange dizziness brushed his mind. He opened the flyleaf and felt, for a heartbeat, as if the book were trying to pull him in. The flash passed like a trick of light. The flyleaf bore the name Abraham as the author, but Loren couldn't make sense of the rest of the script. Later pages had illustrations printed on a material like thin, soft bark. There weren't many pages, and they were bound by copper rings. Both books felt, somehow, occult. "How much for them?" Loren asked, planning to buy them as a curiosity. "You're going to buy them?" The old man seemed pleased. Then, very suddenly, he asked, "Do you do any copying work?" Loren blinked. "Yes, I help the teacher and the church folk transcribe documents and letters." The old man laughed aloud, delighted. When he had first come upon that second book, he had been overjoyed. But the translated text on the latter part of the flyleaf read, "Except for high priests and scribes, anyone else who peruses this book will be subjected to a malicious curse." Before parting with a book like that, he had to know whether the buyer was a copyist. Seeing Loren, he saw in the child's honest answer something of himself centuries ago. "I beg your pardon," the old man said suddenly, smiling in a way that made Loren feel he was listening to a recollection. "I was reminded of something." He wrapped the books in the fur and handed them to Loren. £13, he said casually. Loren's heart jumped. He had exactly £13. He didn't know whether it was a coincidence, some odd fate, or the old man's trickery. He handed over the money, took the books, and watched the man fold up his cup and stand. The old man smoothed his jacket and turned away. "That's that. We'll meet again, Loren." A tremor of unease passed through Loren as the man spoke his name. The second book had seemed to know him. The old man had known his name too. They would meet again. Loren could not say why he believed that, but the certainty prickled at the back of his neck. He followed Pete back into the hall, thinking about where the stranger might have stashed his coffee cup and stool. He looked like a charlatan, and Loren told himself he would treat the books as nothing more than stories. Too many tales ended with a mysterious item drawing you deeper the more you searched. No good ever came of poking about where you weren't wanted. The performance had already begun. Loren found Pete in the front row at the right side of the stage. Pete stood, waved, and called, "Hey, Loren, over here. This band is brilliant." They sat together. The stage was filled with long-haired men, not the wild rock crew Loren had imagined, but serious musicians. The set moved through different styles, rich, varied, and professional. The musicians lifted the crowd, and people clapped, whooped, and laughed. For a small town, this was a rare, bright thing. Around them, others whispered that most of the songs were unfamiliar, but each had a distinct voice. "This band is amazing. They'll put out an album after this tour. They're going to be famous." A cluster of young people shouted such predictions. Loren let the music settle him. In the warmth and the noise, memories surfaced. Mr. Bates's cheese, Joyce's embraces, the cookies Mr. Bumble had given him that day. What had those biscuits tasted like? Time felt slippery. He couldn't even picture Mr. Bumble's face anymore. The night rolled on, and with it the small, sharp nostalgia that comes with growing up in a winter town where miracles and mysteries might sit together under a fur blanket on a street corner. 4. Books, and exploring the secrets of Grandpa Bates. In the evening, Loren sat by the stove, flipping through the 2 books he'd acquired that day while Grandpa Bates packed his bag. An explanation of hieroglyphic symbols was not a difficult primer on symbols. The hieroglyphs it described seemed to be the runes treated in a central chapter. The first half of the book drifted into mystical alchemy, dragon's blood, magical animal parts, and strange plants Loren had never heard of in either life. It listed alchemical processes tied to phases of the moon and even to whether storms had thunder or not. Loren smiled and thought, is this Britain's feudal superstition? It read like a quaint folk tale. The latter half proved more compelling, an autobiography by someone calling himself Nicholas Flamel. Flamel wrote that he was born in 14th century Paris and worked as a scribe copying books, letters, and wills for nobles. He had encountered alchemical passages and taken alchemy up as a hobby. His ordinary life changed when a figure in a black cloak appeared in his dream and told him he would receive a magical book. If he studied it thoroughly, extraordinary power would follow. The dream came true. Flamel described the book he'd found, an ancient, large volume bought for 2 florins, not of paper or parchment, but of delicate, smooth young tree bark. The brass cover was tightly bound and engraved with words or strange symbols. It consisted of 3 groups of 7 pages. The 7th page of each group was blank, except that the 7th page of the first group showed a wand being swallowed by a giant snake. Loren picked up the other book. This must be the Book of Abraham, he thought. The pages looked as if some kind of metal impression had been inked. The writing was unlike anything he'd ever seen and was utterly incomprehensible. The book had 21 pages, and each 7th page bore a strange illustration. The first 7 pages depicted an ancient staff entwined by 2 snakes, one devouring the other. The book was old and yellowed. The sketches were simple, almost colorless. Yet when Loren stared at the drawing, he saw vivid images in his mind. The staff's ancient black wood, the white-spotted snakes, even the matte texture of their scales. He blamed his imagination partly on boredom and partly on a lifetime of films and shows from before. The 14th page, the second of the 7th pages, showed a cross, but nailed to it was not Christ but a snake. That snake seemed different from the first. It had 2 small horns on its head. The 21st page, the third 7th page, depicted springs gushing from a desert with many snakes emerging from the pools. Loren's attention lingered on the water. In his mind, he could taste its cool sweetness. The remaining small illustrations were too tiny to conjure anything clear. In an explanation of hieroglyphic symbols, Flamel dismissed such small drawings as unimportant, popular myth or narrative, not true alchemy. After that, the autobiography frayed into incoherence, full of misspellings and garbled grammar. There were travelogues, too. Flamel claimed to have visited nearly every place on the globe, noting customs and habits, though the text often fell to nonsense. Loren still found himself skimming, fascinated. Grandpa Bates finished packing and peered through the small window. Snow was falling, but the cloud cover was thin and a crescent moon hung low. He pushed the window closed and secured it with a wooden stick. "Loren, listen up. I'm going into the mountains tomorrow. You stay home alone, just like always. Got it?" Bates said. There were monthly trips like this, and Loren never got any answers about them. "Okay, got it," he replied. Bates had aged in the last 2 winters. After his mountain trips, he'd often come back so weakened he seemed newly ill. Rumors among the villagers said Bates had made a pact with some mountain devil. Yet after years of living together, Loren had never seen anything strange beyond an odd reclusiveness. To anyone who took the time, Bates was just an older man, a little tougher than most, like a farmer. Still, Loren decided to follow him the next day and find out for himself. The next morning, after breakfast, Bates shouldered his bag and a wooden staff and left for the mountains. Loren didn't rush. Even without deep snow, winter mountains were hard to cross. He fed the sheep leisurely, leaving enough hay and water in the fold for several days. To keep them from eating all the hay at once, he rigged a crude timed feeder, wood, ropes, and a glass bottle filled with water that would drip slowly. The cold would keep the bottle from freezing, and when the water had slowly leaked out, enough hay would fall from the rafters. It was a simple trick to ration the animals' food. When he'd packed a few days' rations, coarse bread, cheese, smoked lamb, a small knife, a windproof lighter, and a waterproof tarp, he paused and added the fur blanket he'd bought from that eccentric old bookseller. It was past noon when he locked the door and set off. He followed Bates's tracks in the snow, reading the direction from flattened grasses and broken twigs. Trees wore white coats, and the occasional flurry dusted his shoulders. The wind sliced at his exposed skin like a knife. He pulled hat, gloves, and scarf tighter, but cold still found the small gaps. After a while, he spread the tarp and the fur blanket over himself, the tarp atop the blanket like a cloak. The wind stopped clawing at him, and the fur held a furnace-like warmth. This must be polar bear fur, he thought. In less than an hour, the tracks led off the path into the forest and out again. They ended at a large boulder, one side pressed against a small hill. The footprints scattered around the stone and then vanished. Next to the boulder, some stakes and poles formed a crude lever, an obvious labor-saving contrivance. Bates hadn't rolled the stone by brute force. There must be a cave behind it, with similar devices inside. Loren circled the rock a few times, found a sheltered spot a little apart, and built himself a makeshift lean-to of branches and tarp. Wrapped in the fur blanket, he didn't feel cold enough to need a fire, so he didn't light one. The blanket was warmer than he'd imagined, warmer even than his polar bear guess. He settled down, ate a little, and waited quietly for night to fall, listening for any sound from the cave. Chapter 5. Werewolf Bates Passed. The full white moon hung in the night sky as darkness deepened. Silvery light spilled over the pristine snow. Mountains, trees, and earth fused with moon and frost to form a tranquil, almost holy scene. Loren, wrapped in a white fur blanket, felt warm but bored in the makeshift shelter of branches. The quiet world shattered with a roar. "Ah!" A suppressed, painful voice came from the cave, deep and low, as if someone were rolling on the ground in agony. "Ah!" The cries grew higher, hoarser, and at the same time somehow freer. After a pause, a piercing howl cut through the rocks and spilled into the wilderness, echoing off the mountains. Loren's face drained of color. He heard sharp claws scrape against stone, the sound of something transforming and trying to claw its way out, followed by dull thuds as the creature slammed its body into the rock again and again. Loren drew a steadying breath, forced down the tremor in his limbs, and decided it was best to leave. No one could tell if the unhinged Grandpa Bates could break free. He gathered his things and hurried back toward the house under the bright moonlight. his steps growing into a run across the snow. At home, Loren found the windbreak tarp torn open. He went inside, scooped a handful of snow into the stove, and lit a fire to melt it. Warmth crept into the room, and a sip of hot water soothed his throat. He sat and tried to sort his thoughts. Grandpa Bates was a werewolf. He transformed every full moon and had to spend the night up in the mountains. Afterwards, he was weak for a while. That explained Bates's weird habits. The rumors in town about Bates were meant to keep people away, either spread by someone who knew or by Bates himself. Solving one mystery only opened more. Why would Bates take on the burden of raising a child if he preferred solitude? Were they really related by blood? If not, why had the church or the government sent him here back then? Was this Britain really the 1980s he thought he knew? If werewolves existed, might there also be vampires? What role did the church and the state play? And what about the 2 occult books he'd found? Was alchemy just a story? What had the strange bookseller wanted? The questions crowded his mind until he had no answers. One thing, though, was certain. A child couldn't run off on his own into the distance. Images of Bates's wrinkled face came to him, Bates smiling when he promised great things, scolding him for playing in the snow in a thin shirt, and the helplessness after returning from the mountain. So much time had passed without him realizing it. Loren decided to wait. Grandpa Bates deserved that trust. He lay down on the small bed and slept deeply. Daylight found him already awake the next morning. He went to the sheep pen, milked a fresh jug, boiled it, and let it cool. One long drink cleared his senses. The tangled thoughts of the night before faded. No matter how complicated things were, they weren't things he could fix now. Bates had always treated him like family on the ranch for years. That was good enough. He cheerfully put away darker worries that daydreamed about extraordinary people, vampire hunters, then superheroes, and felt lighter. In the afternoon, Bates came down from the mountain, dragging his exhausted body. "Grandpa, you're back," Loren called from a distance. Bates looked at the big child standing before him and felt a rush of mixed emotions, relief, nostalgia, and something else he couldn't name. He remembered the boy when he'd first arrived, small as a kitten, and now 10 years old, able to build a shelter and climb the mountain alone. Bates had noticed Loren's makeshift shelter, well constructed, though Loren didn't know much about making a fire. He was partly relieved and partly anxious. How much had the child seen? There were things Bates wanted to take to his grave, but he had underestimated the observant youth. He thought about how to begin. "I cooked lamb stew with potatoes and macaroni too," Loren said, without noticing Bates's troubled expression. Bates relaxed a little. "You're such a diligent young man," he said. He decided to eat first. He was still very weak. After they finished, Bates swallowed the last piece of lamb and sighed with satisfaction. "Even with the same ingredients, your cooking always turns out better than mine." Loren raised an eyebrow. "It's a talent." They washed up and sat on the doorstep, watching moonlight drape the mountain's snow in a silver veil. The old man's voice carried a note of relief. "Want to hear an old man tell a story?" "Experience is wisdom," Loren said. 40 years ago, when I was still young," Bates began. He had served in World War II, not on the front lines, but in dangerous supply escort missions. On one return trip through the mountains, his unit ran into a small enemy elite squad. The company chasing them split the group up, and Bates's squad found itself separated from the main force. Deeper into the mountains they went, trying to find their way back, and the pursuers drew ever closer. "We broke into a wooden cabin in the mountains," Bates said, glancing at his own house as if recalling the other place. "It looked a bit like this, but much bigger." Inside, aside from ordinary belongings, there was a room built like a cage. In it lay a middle-aged woman, the door secured with 3 or 4 enormous iron locks, as if she were some terrible beast. The key lay on the ground nearby. They opened the cage and woke her. She told them she was a werewolf from the legends, that she became bestial and lost her mind every full moon, and had always lived in the mountains. Tonight, she had locked herself up in advance. She urged them to leave quickly. The young recruits were torn between fear and strange curiosity. 3 of them saw an opportunity. What if becoming werewolves would let them break the encirclement? The rest refused, unwilling to betray their faith. Young Bates, full of a naive, holy certainty, led those who would not yield out of the cabin. The three who wanted to take the gamble stayed. They smeared the woman's saliva on their wounds and waited inside the cabin for the enemy and the night. What happened next? Why did you become a werewolf, too? Loren asked. That's fate, Bates said, his voice heavy with regret. It never goes the way you expect. The three recruits transformed. They went wild, killed the enemy pursuers, and then used scent to track down their former comrades. Bates watched helplessly as the beasts tore his friends apart. The moonlight that night was like blood, he murmured, covering his face. When the moon finally set, Bates, though wounded, was one of the few left alive. The three who had turned came to their senses, horrified by what they had done, and took their own lives with gunshots. While Bates tended his wounds afterward, he found a bite mark on his arm. With their last letters, and in a state of panic, I returned to Britain, he said. I carried their hopes for their families. Bates had planned to go home afterwards and live out his days quietly, but on passing through this small town, he faced his first full moon after the bite. Despite warnings from locals, he climbed the mountain alone and walked for hours. When I woke up the next morning, I was near that cabin, he said slowly. The forest was a mess because of me. Some animals were torn apart, blood everywhere. Loren realized this was the origin of the gruesome rumors that had followed Bates down the mountain. He had settled here, afraid to marry or return to his family. His relatives believed he had died on the battlefield. Chapter 6. Hogwarts Acceptance Letter. For decades, Bates said, what kept me going was the belief that I had to look after my comrades' families. I have a small farm in Scotland, and every year I handed out the rent to them. I always felt it was my duty, my purpose. I was the only one who came back alive, so I took the responsibility. Year after year, those I never knew died off, and I was still here. When the last comrade's widow died, I had nothing left to hold me to this world. That day the mayor came by and told me there was a distant grandnephew to look after. That was you. They said you'd had bad luck and needed a home. I agreed, and a few days later they brought you. That afternoon I watched that boy come up the lane, rags, no shoes, covered in dirt. You remember what came after. Listening to Bates tell his story, Loren felt a deep, calming sympathy. Seeing the old man's pale beard and carved wrinkles, pity rose in him. By misfortune or fate, this man had carried guilt for his life, living alone, far from others. He deserved honor and company instead of solitude. Loren didn't know how to console him. He simply patted Bates's shoulder. Thank you, he said. Bates went quiet, and the two of them stared out at the moor until night fell. After that, Loren never brought up werewolves again. He was curious. Were werewolves really hurt by silver, indestructible, eating raw meat? But every time he thought of asking, he looked at Bates's lined face and held back. Bates taught him the odd thing from his army days, a little combat, some basic scouting. Otherwise, their days were routine. Loren kept flipping through the two strange books he had bought, trying to understand the world they hinted at. Was the man who sold them Nicholas Flamel? The name nagged at him, like something he had heard in another life, but it never resolved into an answer. Life went on until 1991, when Loren turned 11. Summers in the mountains were cooler than the lowlands, and the pasture was at its best. Goats dotted the hillsides. Loren lounged against a rock with a book. He'd read the travelogue at the back of an explanation of hieroglyphs so many times that it was little more than company on lonely days. Pete had long since stopped tending goats and gone to the town, at first to study, later, Loren heard, to learn car repair with his uncle. Now Loren did the herding. Bates said he'd send him to a boarding school in the city in a few years for public schooling. Loren had no plans against it. A commotion in the herd drew his attention. A grayish-brown owl was flying toward him, wings beating unevenly. There aren't many owls this high up, Loren thought. As it drew closer, he felt a shock of déjà vu. Something familiar tugged at him, and his eyes widened. The owl dropped to the ground in front of him and placed a folded letter in his hand, then stared with little round eyes. Loren dug in his bag and pulled out a chunk of goat cheese. The owl hopped closer, nibbled the cheese from his fingers, and rubbed its beak against his hand. The cheese was his own, pure and rich. Loren swore he saw surprise in the bird's eyes, as if it, too, recognized something. He ignored the owl after that and ripped the envelope open. Embossed in the center was a large H surrounded by animals. The first page read, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Headmaster Albus Dumbledore, President of the International Confederation of Wizards, First Class of the Order of Merlin, Grand Sorcerer, Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot. The main body of the letter said, Dear Mr. Morgan, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of all necessary books and equipment. Term begins on September the 1st. We await your owl by no later than July the 31st. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. The second page listed required items for first years. Uniform, 3 sets of plain work robes, black. 1 plain pointed hat for day wear, black. 1 pair of protective gloves, dragon hide or similar. 1 winter cloak, black with silver fastenings. Note, all student clothes must bear name tags. Textbooks. The Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1 by Miranda Goshawk. A History of Magic by Bathilda Bagshot. Magical Theory by Adalbert Waffling. A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration by Emeric Switch. 1000 Magical Herbs and Fungi by Felida Spore. Magical Drafts and Potions by Arsenius Jigger. Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them by Newt Scamander. The Dark Arts, A Guide to Self-Protection by Quentin Trimble. Other equipment, 1 wand, 1 cauldron, pewter, standard size 2, 1 set of glass or crystal files, 1 telescope, 1 brass set of scales. Students may also bring an owl, or a cat, or a toad. Parents are reminded that first years are not allowed their own broomsticks. Loren's hands trembled as he held the paper. This was not the Britain he had imagined in the 80s. This was the world of magic he'd read about in passing, Harry Potter's world, laid out in black and white. He'd planned one day to go to a place like Wall Street or Silicon Valley to make money. But Grandpa Bates's situation had long reminded him that his life was not ordinary. His future had always been a blur, either a normal life or something extraordinary. Now that something extraordinary had arrived with unmistakable clarity, he spent the rest of the afternoon examining the letter, its raised seal, the ink, the handwriting, over and over until dusk. Then he drove the goats down the hill to the cottages and dashed back to the small wooden house. Grandpa Bates, I have news, he called, bursting in. He handed the letter to Bates, who was finishing a new chair. Bates looked from Loren's face to the letter, rubbed his work-roughened hands on his trousers, and began to read. When he finished, he frowned. This Hogwarts school, are you sure this isn't some sort of scam? Bates didn't doubt magic. He'd lived with it. He was a werewolf, after all. But a school like this sounded like trouble. It shouldn't be, Loren said, but he didn't know how to explain any of it. Before they argued further, someone approached down the lane faster than expected. Bates was usually the sort to hear someone coming half an hour off. This woman had not walked the path. She arrived briskly, a middle-aged woman in a black dress, black-rimmed glasses, with a no-nonsense expression and quick steps. I apologize, she said without preamble. I was delayed by rather a keen student. Her voice held authority. I am Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Professor McGonagall explained the basics of Hogwarts to them both. Bates listened, skeptical at first. Then the deputy headmistress reached down to an ordinary pile of wood nearby and, with a smooth motion, transfigured it into a ring of tabby cats that began to stroll and circle about him, purring and mewing. No one could doubt what they were seeing. Bates's expression changed from suspicion to something like wonder, and then acceptance. They all fell silent for a moment, each of them working through a mixture of emotions. Professor McGonagall made arrangements to take Loren to Diagon Alley the next day to buy his school supplies. She accepted a quick, grateful goodbye and was gone almost as swiftly as she had appeared. Chapter 7. Clear Thinking. Never had such a wonderful start. Bates was unusually quiet at dinner. He had known for years that the world was not as ordinary people saw it, but when a sliver of magic had been shown to him, it struck him hard. Were wizards connected to werewolves? Could they cure the troublesome affliction that had plagued him for so long? Questions crowded his mind like a cat that had turned from wood by daylight, scratching incessantly at his thoughts. He had almost told Professor McGonagall everything, but he steadied himself when she explained that magic was a talent and only those chosen could become wizards. He dared not reveal he was a werewolf. Perhaps, in the eyes of wizards, that was unforgivable. Beyond the unknown danger, it might also affect young Loren. Bates had lived long enough to accept death if it came, but Loren's future was bright and full of promise. He believed the boy would achieve great things and did not want to be a burden or cast any shadow over his prospects. Since returning from the battlefield, Bates had lived for others. Responsibility and duty kept him from thinking about what kind of monster he might be, or when he ought to atone. For decades, he had been a machine called Bates, not a man. Loren's arrival had made him feel alive again. Looking after a child was hard work, but Loren was more sensible than any child Bates had known. As he grew, he even learned to cook, and the steaming food Loren made reminded the old man how alive he could feel. Bates said little. He did not want Loren to do things for him out of obligation. If werewolves were no problem for wizards, Loren would handle it on his own. If they were, Bates would not saddle him with that worry. Loren, for his part, was oblivious to Bates's low mood. He had been turning over other things in his head. Owls delivering acceptance letters, Professor McGonagall teaching transfiguration. This could only mean he had stepped into the magical world of the Harry Potter films. The veil had been lifted, and the world's outline was laid out clearly before him. Having watched all 8 films, Loren knew the plot. He and Harry would be in the same year. Lord Voldemort would rise. Dumbledore would guide Harry and the others and gradually eliminate the 7 Horcruxes. Eventually, Dumbledore would arrange Voldemort's final defeat. As a children's fantasy, Loren reasoned surviving Hogwarts by studying hard didn't seem impossible. Bates's condition was like Lupin's, a disease that transformed someone on the full moon, wrecking a normal life. The magical world had an antidote, the wolfsbane potion, which Professor Snape could brew. Loren could buy it or learn to make it himself. Dreaming bigger, maybe he could one day find a true cure. There was also the eccentric bookseller and the 2 strange books Loren had seen. The hieroglyphic explanations seemed tied to alchemy. Nicholas Flamel had been a mere name in the original story, but in the Book of Abraham, the making of the Philosopher's Stone was recorded. Loren now treated those 2 books as critically important. Whether the man he'd met had been Nicholas Flamel in person didn't matter. He felt lighter knowing there were clues and possibilities. With the plot laid out and a clear plan for his future, Loren felt unburdened. He would study, learn the craft of magic, and after graduation, return to the Muggle world to run a small business and live comfortably. Step by step, he thought to himself, he'd grow up. Never had there been such a wonderful beginning. Cough, cough, cough. Loren started, making the sound as he swallowed. Bates watched him cover his mouth and strangely shrugged. He had no idea what extraordinary things this boy might do. The next morning, after breakfast and getting ready, Loren and Bates sat on stools, neatly dressed. Waiting felt long. Bates still looked awkward. He hadn't hosted guests in decades. They didn't wait much longer. Loren suddenly turned his head and looked at an empty space. Bates followed his gaze. With a small pop, Professor McGonagall appeared. The apparition hit Bates harder than seeing wood change into a cat had. Professor McGonagall looked directly at Loren and saw flickers in his blue eyes. "You knew I would appear here?" she asked, surprised. Loren blinked. "I just saw something change over there." McGonagall's expression sharpened. "That's an unusual skill." She started to explain, then paused, remembering something important. "Come along, we have much to do." She reached out, took Loren's hand, and smiled to Bates. "Apparition." Pop. Loren felt her hand nearly wrench free, so he gripped tighter. Darkness closed over him, pressure pressing from every side. He could not breathe. His chest felt bound by cold iron bands. He began to cough violently, tears and snot threatening to spill as if he'd been squeezed through a narrow rubber tube. Traveling the magical world was not as easy as he'd imagined. "Normally our travel is a little easier," Professor McGonagall murmured, stroking his back, "but today we must hurry." Loren recovered quickly under her gentle reassurance. She was softer than he had expected. They stepped onto the doorstep of a suburban house, better and cleaner than the small wooden place he'd been raised in, and more cheerful than the blurred memories of the orphanage. It was the quintessential 1980s British terraced house. "There's another student with you," McGonagall said, and rang the bell. A young couple opened the door with a girl about Loren's age. The couple had typical Caucasian features. The girl's brown hair was thick and a little messy, clearly attempted to be styled, but not quite cooperating. Her brown eyes were wide and lively, and she flashed a happy smile, showing slightly large front teeth in an endearing way. Loren's breath caught. He recognized the face instantly. Professor McGonagall greeted the couple, spoke briefly, and then stepped back, taking the girl's hand. The other student would be joining them. Loren tried to steady his surprise. Meeting Hermione Granger on the very first day was something he hadn't expected, but it was all part of the new world unfolding before him. "Hello, I'm Hermione Granger," the little girl said, holding out her hand. "Hello, I'm Loren Morgan." Loren shook it once, then again. The ritual felt a little formal for two children, but he obliged. "Are you a chosen first year too?" Hermione's eyes glittered. She had been brimming with excitement about everything to do with magic since the night before. She had almost not slept. Loren's thoughts still drifted between curiosity and memory. And before he could answer, she had another question. "We'll talk more later. For now, we're going to the Leaky Cauldron." Professor McGonagall cut in, taking both of their hands in one of hers and waving her wand with the other. Apparition. Pop. The second time was much better than the first. The squeeze in the tube barely lasted a moment. Whether he was getting used to it or the distance was shorter this time, Loren couldn't tell. The lively girl beside him suddenly burst into tears, and before Professor McGonagall could reach her, a stream of questions tumbled out between sobs. "Was that magic? Is the spell called apparition? Can we learn it later?" Hermione drew a deep breath, composed herself, and looked at McGonagall with bright, eager eyes. Loren and the professor fell into a brief silence. Should he join in the questioning? Loren wondered. Show some appropriate wonder? McGonagall smiled with patient authority. "You'll learn that after you enroll. For now, I'll show you how to get from the Muggle world to Diagon Alley. In future years, you'll have to do it yourselves." They peered around. Before them stood a dingy little pub, plaster-stained black and easily overlooked by passers-by. Professor McGonagall led them through. Inside it was darker and fouler than it looked, full of oddly dressed people, top hats, long tails dragging on the floor, who stared at Hermione's jeans and plaid jacket as if at a rare costume. Loren's clothes, made by the town tailor, seemed old-fashioned on the street, but here they passed unnoticed. Hermione bristled under the odd looks, frowning, but she said nothing. The owner of the pub nodded at McGonagall as they passed. The professor led them into a small walled courtyard cluttered with rubbish bins and weeds. "Count 3 bricks up from the wall over the bin, then 2 across. Tap it 3 times with your wand, like this." She demonstrated. The brick wiggled, a small hole appeared, and the mortar shifted until it became an archway into another world. "Welcome to Diagon Alley," McGonagall announced, a note of pride in her voice. She did this every year and never tired of it. Revealing the magical world to a Muggle-born child was one of the joys of her job. They stepped through. The arch closed behind them with a muffled rumble. Diagon Alley unfolded, narrow lanes lined with every sort of shop, sleeping owls cooing in cages, rows of cauldrons, brooms of odd shapes propped against doorways. Hermione peppered them with questions as they walked. "Professor McGonagall, why do wizards use owls for mail? Why are cauldrons different sizes and materials? How do flying brooms fly? Do they have engines? What's their power source?" Her questions tumbled out faster and faster, a nervous child's way of grappling with the strangeness around her. McGonagall answered at first, but Hermione kept circling back, always adding, "Why?" "Some questions you'll be taught after you arrive at school," McGonagall said finally. "Others you'll have to discover for yourselves." Hermione fell quiet, turning to Loren. He was busy taking everything in, matching shops and people to images in his head from the life he'd remembered. Hermione noticed and nudged him. "Loren, why aren't you asking anything? Aren't you curious?" Loren looked at the girl with the truly bright eyes and answered with a small smile. "I live on a ranch. I have 2 talking kittens. One is very pretty, the other, well, not so much." "Oh, are those wizard pets too?" I thought you were from a muggle family like me, Hermione blurted. She had already learned from McGonagall that muggle was what wizards called non-magical folk. Professor McGonagall raised an eyebrow at the mention of talking cats. She had never seen any when she'd visited Loren's home. The not-so-good-looking one always asked why, Loren said straight-faced, trying to suppress a laugh. Why? Because it wasn't cute? Do you have more cats? Can you give me one? Even if it's not cute, Hermione said, delighted at the idea. Even if it doesn't talk, that's fine. Loren couldn't hold it in any longer. Cute cats don't always ask why, he blurted, then burst into laughter. McGonagall allowed herself half an amused smile. Hermione blinked, then pretended to be offended, tapping Loren's shoulder lightly. Mean, you tricked me, she said through her gritted teeth. Just kidding, Loren said, laughing and apologizing at the same time. They passed Flourish and Blots. Hermione's eyes shone as if she could stay there for weeks and read every book. McGonagall, however, had other things to do. We need to go to Gringotts first, she said. The wizarding currency is different. We'll exchange some muggle money there. Gringotts stood taller than the other shops, its pale stone gleaming, with bronze doors and goblins in scarlet and gold uniforms posted outside. The goblins were short, much shorter than an adult, but often as tall as Loren, with long arms and long, efficient faces. They bowed to McGonagall as the trio entered. A silver door inside bore a carved warning in old rhyme. Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits. Greed may invite grave punishment for those who seek what is not theirs. Inside, the main hall was marble and echoing. A long row of counters stretched away, with hundreds of goblins perched on high stools attending customers, some weighing coins on brass scales, others inspecting gems. Doors led off to vaults below. Goblins escorted people through these doors with brisk professionalism. With McGonagall's help, Loren and Hermione exchanged their pounds for wizarding currency. The goblins explained the basics while a clerk fussed over their notes. Muggle money could be converted into galleons, the standard wizarding gold coin, and such exchanges were recorded. Large transactions would draw questions. The records were part of the bank's careful bookkeeping. Exchanging galleons back into Muggle money was easier. Nothing much stopped a wizard who needed Muggle pounds for living among Muggles. Though there were other ways wizards could get hold of Muggle cash that weren't exactly by the book. Loren listened, thinking like someone who'd spent a previous life reading about markets. The wizarding currency system seemed, in his view, primitive and centralized. If the goblins alone decided how many coins were in circulation, and if they controlled the rules, then any attempt to attack the system, price manipulation or otherwise, would be met simply by the goblins changing the rules. A small, isolated wizarding market would be hard to shake through economics alone. He smirked inwardly at the image of making the price of bread skyrocket. The goblins would simply adjust their ledgers and write new restrictions. The exchange rates felt awkward to him. 1 galleon to 17 sickles, 1 sickle to 29 newts. He preferred decimals. His old life made him comfortable with powers of 10. He made a mental note that even stovepipe economies and ancient vaults had things to be learned from them. They each took out the pounds their parents had given them and changed them for wizarding currency. Galleons, the amount Professor McGonagall had said would be enough for a first year. The coins were carried in 2 small cloth bags, one clutched in Loren's hand, the other in Hermione's. Loren's head swam as he tried to work out the exchange rates. The goblin banker's odd, prime-numbered system made his brain ache. He almost wanted to smash a goblin's head with an abacus. Dazed, they followed Professor McGonagall to Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions to get fitted for robes, then on to buy stationery. Their last stop was Flourish and Blots, which Hermione had been most looking forward to. While Professor McGonagall went to collect 2 sets of first-year textbooks, Loren and Hermione wandered among the stacks. The books were wildly inconsistent in size, some as thick and heavy as paving slabs, some as small as stamps, and some even bore warning labels, dangerous, do not touch. Loren picked out a few titles, skimming the spines, the Standard Book of Spells series, Curses and Counter-Curses, Wandering with the Werewolf, and Alchemy, from beginner to master. He hesitated at the thought of reading them all. Hermione, by contrast, filled her arms with books that would help a muggle-born settle into this strange new world. Important magical events of the 20th century, modern history of magic, the rise and fall of the dark arts, and of course, Hogwarts, a history. Just looking at those titles made Loren's scalp itch. Glancing at Hermione's thick, curly hair, he kept his voice low. She noticed his stare and peered at his selections, her face creasing into a disapproving smile. "We should understand the magical world first if we're to adapt properly," she said. "These are excellent preparatory reads, especially for Muggle-borns." Seeing Loren's reluctance, she added, "The books you chose aren't really right for beginners. We should learn the basics before we dive into advanced topics." Loren didn't get a chance to argue. Hermione's earnest chatter gave him a headache. But she genuinely meant well, so he tried a gentler approach. "Let's choose different books," he suggested. "You can lend me yours when you're done, and we can save money for other things." Hermione brightened. "Then we'll write to each other. By owl." "Okay," Loren agreed. Harmony returned between them, and both felt the strange pull toward the books stamped dangerous. They were nearly drawn in, until a customer was chased and bitten by a grudge-bearing volume, and they both retreated. After buying a cauldron, they strolled past an apothecary window filled with rare, expensive ingredients, a unicorn horn priced at 21 galleons, acromantula venom at 100 galleons a dose. Loren grinned at the thought that once he befriended Hagrid, money would never be a problem. Eventually, they reached Ollivander's wand shop, a small, slightly shabby place whose gold lettering was flaking. Inside a narrow parlor, long benches faced shelves stacked nearly to the ceiling with thousands of labeled boxes. Mr. Ollivander himself was an old man with pale, silvery eyes that looked like the moon. He greeted Professor McGonagall and then examined Loren and Hermione, walking slowly around them once, twice, before his gaze fixed on Hermione. "Oh, such vivid characteristics," he murmured, "almost overflowing, extraordinary foresight, keenness, and a touch of madness amid indecision. Step forward, little girl. Your wand is eager." Hermione's eyes showed a flicker of fear, but she obeyed and stepped out from the bench toward the piles of boxes. The moment she did, one small box trembled and leapt into Ollivander's hand. He opened it and produced a wand. 10 3/4 inches vinewood, dragon heartstring, he said. Dragon heartstring helps you learn quickly. Vinewood, used by the Celts to represent the 10th tree month, favors those with great ambitions. The moment you entered, this wand responded strongly. We can skip some of the usual testing. Hermione took the wand. Its tip glowed with a warm, soft light, and she smiled radiantly. Ollivander smiled back. Remember, the wand chooses the wizard, not the other way around. Then it was Loren's turn. Mr. Ollivander produced a long tape measure with silver markings and asked which hand Loren used most. He measured him meticulously. Shoulder to fingertip, wrist to elbow, shoulder to floor, knee to armpit, even head circumference, explaining as he went. Ollivander has been making wands since 382 BC, he said. Through generations of study, we have identified 3 particularly powerful wand cores: unicorn hair, phoenix feather, and dragon heartstring. Each has stable, unique properties, very different from crude mass-produced wands. Even after Mr. Ollivander let go, the tape continued to measure Loren, uncoiling and recoiling until it dropped into a neat ball. He brought out a stack of long boxes. Hermione's eyes shone as he handed Loren a wand. "Try this. Maple, unicorn hair, 7 inches, Mr. Ollivander suggested. Loren lifted the wand, but the moment he did, Ollivander snatched it back. They tried 2 more wands, and each time it went the same way. Loren couldn't help feeling a little resentful. Hermione had it right away, and he had to struggle. Professor McGonagall waited patiently nearby. Hermione watched him with concern. Despite his prickly personality, she hoped they would both make it into Hogwarts together. Finally, Ollivander produced a dark wand. "Applewood, phoenix feather, exactly 10 inches, he announced. Loren felt steadier holding it. He flicked it, and a gentle breeze moved through the shop, rustling the papers and making the candles flare briefly. Both he and Mr. Ollivander smiled. "Applewood suits those with great ideals," Ollivander said. "They tend to excel at dueling and often live long lives. Phoenix feathers are selective. They suit a strong personality, and when they find their match, they reveal extraordinary potential." Each wand cost 7 galleons. After paying, they wandered a little more through Diagon Alley. Loren bought a spectacled owl to send letters home. It looked a bit gangly, but he thought it was adorable. On the way back to the entrance, Professor McGonagall kept warning them not to wave their wands around recklessly. Magic was dangerous. Apart from a few spells marked as safe, they should not try to practice at home. She told a cautionary tale about someone who mispronounced a spell and summoned a wild ox that sat on top of them. They listened dutifully, though how much of it lodged in their heads was uncertain. Hermione hugged Loren and called, "Remember to write to me," before skipping off to her parents, eager to share the day's events. Loren felt once more the peculiar sensation of being squeezed through a rubber tube as they passed through the barrier for the train. After getting his ticket and saying goodbye to Professor McGonagall, watching her vanish in a sharp crack as she apparated, Loren decided a position as a Hogwarts professor might not be as easy as it seemed. Only once he was home did he remember that he had meant to ask Professor McGonagall about something else. Why other young wizards couldn't perceive the exact point where someone apparated down while he could. What strange talent could that be? But he didn't dwell on it. He had a long life ahead of him, and magic already seemed more astonishing and more complicated than he had imagined. 10. Simple and pure joy. After returning from Diagon Alley, Loren read his new textbooks over and over and started practicing the absolutely safe charms. Professor McGonagall's warning about someone nearly losing their life for mispronouncing a single syllable was still fresh in his mind. No matter how bold he felt, he wouldn't risk trying anything dangerous. The introductory section of the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, listed a number of harmless little charms. Daisies, sweet cream, and sunshine, which would tint things a cheerful yellow. Rabbit eyes, harp sighs, clear water turns to wine, which added the scent and taste of wine to plain water, and other short household incantations. They were nothing like the more precise spells that came later. The textbook explained the basics. Magic was broadly divided into branches: transfiguration, charms, countercharms, and healing, and charms were meant to add properties to objects rather than turn one thing into another. For first years, Miranda Goshawk formally taught only 9 charms: the softening charm, the severing charm, the levitation charm, the repairing charm, Alohomora, the locking charm, the illumination charm, the knockback jinx, and the fire-making charm. The book not only showed how to cast them, but also traced their histories and the circumstances that led to their invention. For example, Alohomora, originally meaning friendly to thieves, had been brought back from Africa by a British wizard who used it to become a notorious burglar, which in turn led to the creation of the counter Alohomora. Before that, people simply used portaberto to blow a huge hole indoors, or even cruder methods like open sesame. Charms mostly evolved from Latin, and Loren could already see patterns in their forms and evolution. After he had finished reading, he went to practice. He lived up on a mountain, away from townsfolk, so he didn't need to look for a special spot. Still, his favorite place was the little lake. The first charm he tried was reparo. He tore a 5-pound note into 5 pieces, laid them on a stone, and pointed his wand at one fragment, hoping to make 5 whole banknotes. The scheme was criminal, and it failed. The piece he aimed at seemed to tug the others toward it and knit them back into a single banknote, but the joins were obvious. He blamed his pronunciation. The ending should be a touch higher. After adjusting his tone, casting felt easier. With a few more tries, he noticed another small change that helped, a curl of the little finger, and the repaired banknote eventually looked almost flawless. It was a kind of magical intuition, or perhaps simply proficiency gained through repetition. Loren had read about intuition in his past life, where ordinary logic goes from A to B and B to C to conclude A equals C. Intuition skips steps. Whether it was natural talent or the advantage of remembering another life, each tiny improvement felt huge. That habit of self-correction continued. At first, his levitation charm required dramatic, expressive movements, elegant gestures tied to feeling, but with practice he could mutter the incantation stiffly, wave his wand straight, and still get the effect. Some spells, with enough repetition, lost their need for flourish and became second nature. Loren loved portaberto. The Grade 1 book barely mentioned it, focusing instead on Alamora, but he adored the explosive, piercing quality of Portoberto. He tried it again and again, letting his intuition guide tone and posture. At first his wand gave off light, but nothing happened. The red flash struck stone and left it unchanged. Then, during dinner, a bright idea hit him. He stepped to the wooden cabin door, and in a clear child's voice, shouted, "Portoberto!" A loud crack echoed, and a big hole blew clean through the old door that had stood over Bates's kitchen for as long as anyone could remember. Bates was furious, so furious he practically went feral, and Loren only calmed him down by promising to take over all kitchen duties until September 1st, when school began. That wasn't the end of it. Loren discovered the spell only worked properly when there was actually a door to blow in. Curious, he made a simple wooden door in the open and easily blasted it. He even used the charm on the entrance to the cave Bates hid in on full moon nights. At first, he could only blacken the stone with a chip, but after relentless practice, on a bright morning, he finally punched a football-sized hole clean through the giant boulder. The center looked as if someone had set off a charge, black and blown out. Loren felt a glow of satisfaction. Something changed after that. He started seeing everything as a door to be opened. In the bright, careless joy of discovery, his Portoberto became something else, its pronunciation rounded and strange, barely like the original. He wasn't sure what to call the altered charm, but it didn't matter. Happiness was enough. The hills, stones, and trees bore the brunt of his experiments, and a steady series of explosive booms filled the air. When Bates came up and saw the damage, his reaction was worse than any transformation into a werewolf. Here was an 11-year-old who hadn't even started Hogwarts yet, wielding what looked like unlimited destructive magic. The idea of an adult wizard with that power was terrifying. Fortunately, Loren never used it on animals, and that small mercy kept Bates from completely losing faith in the boy. For a day or two, Bates comforted himself with the thought that Loren was just a mischievous child. That view lasted less than 2 days. Loren discovered he could use his little blast to fish. The number of fish he caught in an afternoon was more than 2 people could eat in a week. Bates, practical to the end, lost his temper, thumped Loren, and took the fish down the mountain to sell. That evening, Loren sat in his chair, stroked Hanch, the spectacled owl, feeling a little put out but not daring to complain. Exploding fish had been enormous fun. He'd have to stop. He nearly released Hanch to fend for himself, as had become their habit, but the feel of the owl's feathers was too comforting. Hanch blinked, the white rings around his eyes twitching. The owl seemed affronted, but owls couldn't argue. In his spare time, Loren read Wandering with Werewolves. It was a good story and a decent book. Aside from Lockhart's glorified picture-perfect self-portraits, lavishly illustrated, the book taught him a little about werewolves, knowledge that probably didn't do much for Professor Bates. As for alchemy, from beginner to master, Loren opened it, read for 5 minutes, and shoved it to the bottom of his trunk. It assumed a lot of prior learning, charms, potions, and more, so it wasn't an introduction at all. He refused to touch it again before school started. 11. On the Hogwarts Express. By the end of August, Loren had finished the first-year textbooks he'd brought with him. He treated the standard book of charms like a storybook, reading every page but not daring to try most of the spells. Bates had grown used to Loren's obsessive practice of magic. Household chores were increasingly handled by Loren's cautious domestic charms. Bates spent his days unsure what to do, tugging at his beard and smacking his lips as he sipped wine Loren conjured from plain water. Eventually, Bates couldn't stand it any longer. They packed their trunks, left the sheep with the mare, and set off for London a few days early. Loren wanted to visit Harry or Hermione while they had the spare time, but he couldn't remember their addresses. Harry supposedly lived on Privet Drive, but Loren had no idea where that was. The Grangers ran a dental clinic, but he didn't know its location either. He considered sending a letter by owls to Hermione and following the reply, but that felt ridiculous, so he gave up. School was about to start. Bates wandered through the crowded streets with a nostalgia that felt like decades old. London wasn't the London he remembered. It left him wistful, as if a lifetime had passed. He spent a few days meandering and made a quiet decision of his own, telling none of it to Loren. They spent a pleasant few days shopping. Bates insisted that even if Hogwarts had a uniform, it was sensible to several sets of underclothes and proper winter garments. Eventually, both of Loren's large trunks were full. On the morning school began, they woke early, had breakfast, and hurried to King's Cross. Bates glanced at the busy station and muttered, "Platform 9 3/4. How peculiar." When they reached Platform 9, Loren paused. Bates noticed the small, dejected boy nearby and realized this was the spot. "Hey, cheer up, lad," Bates called, showing no sorrow at the imminent separation. Loren sniffed. "I'm just trying to think of something to say to comfort you, old man." "You don't have to comfort me, you little rascal. You've been able to look after yourself for ages," Bates said with a grin. Loren was momentarily speechless. Seeing the boy's mood soften, Bates's tone warmed. "Remember to write and, well, let's say our goodbyes here, little fellow." Loren felt ridiculous, but softened and blurted, "I'll miss you, Grandpa Bates." Then, with a push of his trolley, he charged at the barrier. Bates watched the boy run into the brick wall and vanish between the passing muggles with no reaction from them. "What a magical fellow," he said, his voice catching. He turned away, shoulders suddenly slumped, and walked out of the station. He found a bench and sat down, tears spilling from his cloudy eyes. He covered his face with a hand. "It's infuriating," he murmured. "They make an old man lose face like this." On the train, Loren followed the crowd into the deep red steam engine, emptied his trunks into the luggage rack with a reluctant heart, and found an empty compartment by the window. He watched faces go by. Two red-haired twins nudging each other, a chubby boy carrying a toad, and the features felt familiar in a way that tugged at distant memories. No one joined his compartment, so Loren closed his eyes, intending to sleep through the journey out of habit, sleep on the train, wake up refreshed at the destination. And he looked forward to trying Hogwarts' special snacks. He was very curious about magical treats. He had barely drifted off when a sleeve tapped his face. Opening his eyes, he found Hermione standing over him, cheeks puffed with anger. "Loren Morgan, I finally found you. You didn't write for over a month. I waited every day, and you didn't write until school started," she scolded, swatting his head with her robe sleeve. Loren grabbed her hand to stop her. He didn't want to go bald from too many cuffed heads. "It was an accident. The little spectacled owl I bought isn't trained yet. I need to bring it to Hogwarts so the other owls can teach it," he said, nodding at the owl perched on the luggage rack and spouting nonsense to get by. The poor owl pecked at some breadcrumbs, confused and unable to argue. Hermione believed him. If pigeons were trained and puppies were trained, of course an owl would need training too. She sat opposite Loren, intending to talk about the things she'd pre-read and the bits she'd learned about the magical world. Before she could get into it, Loren interrupted with a different question. "Do you think the Hogwarts Express runs on magic or machines? What powers it?" Hermione's attention shifted, and she began to explain her thoughts. Loren chimed in bits and pieces, sometimes talking nonsense, and then drawing it back. "It must use coal, specially selected coal. Even washed coal wouldn't do." Whenever Hermione asked something Loren couldn't answer, he skillfully changed the subject. As long as he moved fast enough, the question marks in Hermione's eyes couldn't catch him. Seeing her face light up as she accepted his rambling logic pleased him. Teasing a child felt curiously satisfying. He didn't worry about the consequences. He just wanted to enjoy the moment. The snack trolley finally arrived. Loren bought a bit of everything and insisted Hermione try them. She protested. She'd brought a packed lunch from her mother and hated wasteful spending, but temptation won out. Loren, ever the rogue, was hard to resist. Hermione still insisted on paying half, even though he refused the money. They sampled Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, pumpkin pasties, licorice wands, and other oddities. Loren was disappointed he didn't get any earwax-flavored beans. Hermione hesitated at the chocolate frog. It looked too much like a real frog. Loren unwrapped one and bit off half its head while the hind legs still twitched. Hermione nearly screamed. Loren shoved a twitching frog leg into her mouth before she could, and though she wanted to spit it out, the chocolate melted immediately. The sweet flavor filled her mouth, and her resistance crumbled. She admitted it was delicious and became fascinated by the collectible wizard cards that came with the frog. Things escalated when Loren pulled an actual cockroach out of a box and popped it into his mouth, a smear of white, some kind of filling, flicking at the corner of his lip. Hermione screamed once, then clamped a hand over her mouth, remembering that a proper witch didn't make a scene. Tears came to her eyes. Loren couldn't help laughing at her expression. Outside the compartment, Neville, who had been traipsing up and down the corridor looking for his lost toad, caught sight of the scene. A very unrestrained boy, laughing wickedly, and a small witch beside him, about to cry, but too polite to make a fuss. Thinking of his grandmother's lectures and his parents' reputation, Neville's fists clenched. 12. Arrive at your destination. Arrive at your destination. Loren swallowed the candy in his mouth. It was chocolate, lemon-filled, and delicious. Hermione, recovering, wiped her eyes and muttered, "Magic snacks, magic snacks." Neville pushed the compartment door open, intending to scold the culprit, but at the last moment he chickened out and froze in the doorway. The two people inside looked up at the small, round-faced boy. "Is there anything I can help you with?" Loren asked. Neville stammered, I thought you were bullying a first year, but it doesn't look like it." Hermione blushed but explained, "I was just startled by that novelty candy." Neville hesitated, his eyes flicking to a box on the table. Loren held it up. "Cockroach clusters. Want some?" He liked this timid but brave boy. Neville quickly waved a hand. No. Even among wizards, not everyone liked cockroach-shaped sweets. Loren held out his hand. "Nice to meet you. I'm Loren Morgan, a first year." Neville took it. "Neville Longbottom. I'm a first year too." Hermione added, "I'm Hermione Granger." After introductions, they sat and began chatting and nibbling. Hermione was full of questions about Neville's wizarding background, but Neville was shy and soft-spoken. Loren steered the conversation, and the atmosphere eased into something pleasant. After a while, Loren felt something nagging at him. He remembered the part of the story where Neville had lost his pet. He glanced at Neville, who was happily munching Bertie Bott's every flavor beans and seemed to have forgotten all about the toad. Loren waited a beat, then asked, "Weren't you looking for something earlier?" Neville slapped his forehead. "I forgot. My toad! I was looking for my pet." Hermione was still processing the idea when Loren said, "Let's look for it together." They started asking compartment by compartment. Some they'd already tried. Each refusal made Neville more disheartened. The earlier snacking now seemed to sit heavy on him like guilt. Hermione, growing anxious, pushed open a door and called out, "Has anyone seen a toad?" Neville lost a toad. Inside sat Harry and Ron, black hair, green eyes, and crooked glasses. Beside him, red hair and freckles. Loren recognized them at once. "We already told him. We haven't seen it," Ron replied, a little impatient. He had his wand out and was planning to turn something yellow. Hermione, eager, dropped into the seat and said brightly, "Oh, are you casting? Let us see." Ron blinked then, "Oh, all right." He waved his wand awkwardly and began, "Daisies, sweet cream, and sunshine. Turn this silly fat rat yellow." Nothing happened. The gray fat rat snoozed on, unmoved. Loren's gaze settled on the animal, and something odd happened. His pupils seemed to brighten, a shadow sliding across his vision. For a moment, a dim, blood-red glow hovered around the rat, an image no one else could see. Loren thought, for reasons he couldn't explain, of the line, "I'm a rat, you see?" The strange vision faded almost as quickly as it had come. He felt his eyes were odd, but had no explanation, and decided to wait until they reached Hogwarts to figure it out. Hermione calmed, fixed Harry's glasses, and introduced herself and Loren properly. They were getting close to their destination, and she reminded everyone to change into robes. Before she left Harry and Ron, Loren had another idea, find someone older to help. He pulled Hermione and Neville out into the corridor. A short way down the train, they saw a pale boy with platinum blonde hair, flanked by two larger boys heading toward Harry's compartment. Loren ignored them and kept moving. They soon reached a red-haired boy with a gleaming silver P pinned to his chest. Loren stepped forward. "Hello, we're first years. Excuse me, are you a prefect?" The boy's face showed a flicker of pride at being recognized, then he smoothed it into a courteous smile. "Yes, I'm Prefect Percy Weasley. Can I help you?" Hermione's clear voice rang out. "This is Neville. His pet toad's missing. Could you help find it?" Neville's face went beet red. Percy relaxed. "Of course, shouldn't be hard for a prefect." He produced his wand, flicked it, and pointed. Oxio! As the word left his lips, an ugly toad shot out from Neville's pocket and landed on the floor where Percy had indicated. Oh, I put it in my pocket. I forgot, Neville blurted. Hermione peered at Percy. Was that Oxio? Percy's smile warmed at the praise. You'll learn it too. They thanked him, said goodbye, and returned to their compartments. Loren changed into his robes and split the candy on the table with Hermione. An announcement echoed through the carriage. The train will arrive at Hogwarts in 5 minutes. Please leave your luggage on the train. It will be delivered to the school for you. What kind of magic is this? Is it the sonorous charm? Hermione asked, eyes alight with curiosity. The four of them gathered and surged toward the compartment doors. When the train stopped, everyone crowded out, pushing and shoving. In the crush, the group split up, but Loren tugged Hermione through the press and rejoined Neville. Following Hagrid's booming call, they stumbled along a narrow path out from the trees and came to a lake. Across on a high slope stood a majestic castle, spires and turrets glittering like a constellation, 4 to a boat. Loren and Hermione climbed into one. Neville found his way in. The last to join them was a boy with light brown hair who introduced himself as Seamus Finnegan. Loren's eyes widened. Seamus, the explosion enthusiast. The little fleet of boats drifted across the calm water, pushing through trailing vines. The castle lights shimmered and swayed in the ripples. Loren felt something quietly like wonder settle in him. On the boat, Hermione kept talking about the sorting. Loren, unable to resist, blurted, I heard there's a test when you arrive, and those who fail get expelled. Hermione went white and began fretting. What will I do? I haven't memorized half the things. I haven't finished my reading. Professor McGonagall will definitely kick me out. Neville and Seamus looked panicked. Then Loren couldn't help grinning. Heh heh, just kidding. I made that up. Hogwarts hasn't expelled anyone in years. Hermione let out a relieved exhale and slapped Loren hard on the thigh. He howled theatrically and doubled over, and she felt a twinge of guilt for making him suffer the joke. When they landed the boats, they passed through a dark tunnel, walked across a stretch of grass, and arrived at the castle gate, where Professor McGonagall was already waiting. 13. In the branch where dreams begin. Led by Professor McGonagall into a very small, empty room, the new students squeezed together shoulder to shoulder, nervously taking in everything around them. Welcome to Hogwarts, McGonagall said softly, explaining the 4 houses and the house cup. Light shone in the eyes of every first year. For some of them, the world was about to change forever. I hope that no matter which house you are sorted into, you will bring it honor. In a few minutes, the sorting ceremony will take place in front of the whole school. I suggest you tidy yourselves and remain quiet while you wait. I will come for you shortly. With that, she left. The newcomers started chattering among themselves. Harry asked Ron and Neville, who came from wizarding families, how can they sort us correctly? Hermione pricked up her ears nearby, waiting for an answer. I suppose it must be some sort of test. Fred said it would be terrible, but he was probably joking. Harry and Hermione felt the old tremor of worry and anxiety spread through the group. Hermione began silently rehearsing the charms she knew. Loren worried that the sorting hat might pry into his memories and judge him like a dark wizard. No one was sent to Azkaban on their first day at Hogwarts, he told himself, but he had forgotten the hat could look into minds. Ghosts floated out of the wall behind them, drifting through the group and offering comfort and introductions to their houses, but they did not explain the exact process, and that lack of detail made Hermione even more nervous. Professor McGonagall returned and marshaled the first years into a single file. They passed through the entrance hall and into the magnificent Great Hall. The enchanted ceiling mirrored the night sky. 4 long tables ran down the hall, each filled with students from a house. The tables glittered with golden plates and goblets. A raised platform at the front held the staff. All eyes turned to the line of new students. McGonagall set a small 4-legged stool on the platform and placed an old pointed patched hat upon it. The hat opened as if to speak and began to sing. Put me on and try me. I will tell you which house you should be sorted into. You might belong in Gryffindor, where dwell the brave at heart. Their daring, nerve, and chivalry set Gryffindors apart. You might belong in Hufflepuff, where they are just and loyal. Those patient Hufflepuffs are true and unafraid of toil, or yet in wise old Ravenclaw, if you've a ready mind, where those of wit and learning will always find their kind. Or perhaps in Slytherin, you'll make your real friends, those cunning folk use any means to achieve their ends. So put me on, don't be afraid, and don't get in a flap. After the song, the new students relaxed a little, better understanding the sorting. Ron, who had been unnerved by Fred's terrifying tales, was still muttering about teaching Fred a lesson. Then the sorting began. Professor McGonagall called names. Hannah Abbott. Loren watched the first of his year step forward, a small girl with 2 braids who sat and put the hat on. Hufflepuff, the hat declared. The Hufflepuffs cheered, welcoming the girl regardless of her blood status. When Hermione's name was called, she rushed forward. Before she could properly sit, the hat cried out, Gryffindor. Hermione found a seat at the Gryffindor table, her heartbeat slowing, then looked over at Loren. There was comfort in small, familiar faces in an unfamiliar place. Loren Morgan, McGonagall said. It was Loren's turn. His chest beat hard. The hat touched his head and whispered, Strange boy, there's a fog in your mind. You don't seem very clever. Loren bristled. He felt personally attacked, but he also felt a small relief. The hat could not see the depths of his past. Hufflepuff would be a good choice, the hat went on. Very good. A slight dig at the Badgers that calmed Loren further. He allowed his thoughts to drift. Anything but Azkaban. The hat muttered, What on earth is in your mind? Why would it be Azkaban? Loren shivered and stayed silent. All right then. The hat dragged the last word out and finally announced, Gryffindor. Finding an empty seat at the Gryffindor table, Loren finally relaxed. When the sorting finished, everyone looked up toward the platform. Albus Dumbledore rose, a tall figure with silver hair and a lively face. Nitwit, blubber, oddment, tweak, thank you all. The odd little speech made some think Dumbledore was eccentric, but when Percy explained that Dumbledore was one of the greatest wizards alive, those words seemed to carry some secret meaning. Plates upon the students' tables filled magically with food: roast beef, roast spring chicken, pork chops, lamb, carrots, and potatoes, prepared 100 different ways. Potatoes that Loren remembered with particular fondness. Conversation and laughter swelled. Ghosts drifted among the tables. One introduced himself as Sir Nicholas de Mimsy Porpington, and shrugging off reserve, demonstrated his status by wobbling his head from his neck. Loren admired the sight and jokingly said, If you'd lived until Louis XVI perfected the guillotine, you wouldn't have that problem. Sir Nicholas and Loren spent a while discussing Louis XVI and the guillotine, at the end of which the ghost expressed an almost absurd respect for the king. Dessert followed courses upon courses. Loren sampled several puddings slowly, even tucking one away for a late-night snack. Talk turned to families. Ron and Neville came from old wizarding families, though such households were few. Many were half-bloods like Seamus, and a lucky few, Hermione and Loren among them, were from Muggle families. Amid the laughter, Loren noticed a flicker of shadow along Professor Snape's sleeve, and a similar, sharper shadow over Harry's scar. The darkness vanished quickly, but from across the hall, Professor Quirrell's turban gleamed black for a long moment. Percy introduced the staff. The man in purple robes was Professor Quirrell, who would teach defense against the dark arts. The black-robed, hook-nosed professor was Severus Snape, potions master, renowned for his skill in the dark arts. Harry filed the names away in his mind. Snape, watching from the front, had noticed those eyes early on. Memories rose in him like a tide, and complex feelings washed over him. The child was not particularly likable, but he had striking eyes. Dumbledore added a few rules. Do not enter the Forbidden Forest. Do not wander the corridors casting spells. And he emphasized, more than once, a certain corridor on the right of the 4th floor. Loren thought the repetition was a little too emphatic. The feast ended with a peculiar school song sung to a tune uncannily like a funeral march. The singers seemed to relish it, and Loren listened with amusement. He was already imagining teaching the Weasley twins a different tune, Lost Rivers. Before he graduated, he was sure it would cause quite a scene. After the feast, exhausted but excited, the new students were shown to their house common rooms. Loren and his companions followed Percy to the portrait of the fat lady. Loren, Harry, Ron, Neville, and Seamus were assigned to the same dormitory. They were tired in their bodies but wide awake in their heads, not wanting the evening to end. After introductions, conversation unfurled. They compared notes on classes, transfiguration, charms, herbology, potions. Neville knew a few things but spoke slowly and nervously. Ron did most of the talking and enjoyed it thoroughly. Harry worried about keeping up, but Loren and Neville offered reassurance and the worry ebbed. Before lights out, Loren noticed Harry sitting by his bed, looking at the moon through the window. Loren went over and said quietly, "Harry? Have a good dream." 14. About eyes. The next morning, Loren woke just after dawn. Seeing the others still asleep, he dressed quietly and slipped out. The pudding he had tucked into his pocket the night before had been swapped by a house elf. The lemon pudding he'd hidden was gone, replaced by a strawberry one. He left the common room, had breakfast, and spent the morning exploring the first and second floors of the castle. He peered longingly at the entrance to the girls' lavatory. Myrtle was probably inside, and he couldn't speak Parseltongue anyway. So on the first day, he didn't want to risk looking like a pervert and gave it a miss. The whole castle had a solid, lived-in feel, ancient but well-kept. Portraits lined the corridors. Many of the sitters were alive, and some greeted him as he passed. He spent a lot of time on the moving staircases, trying to figure out their patterns. Several times they whisked him straight from the first floor to the second, or vice versa, and it took ages to get where he wanted. As more students filled the halls, Loren returned to the dormitory to wake Harry and the others. Soon after, he grabbed his books and hurried to Transfiguration. Professor McGonagall was already on the lectern in her cat form, two front paws neat and upright, her tail curled around them. Loren's special sight flared. A soft red glow seemed to cling to the cat's body. The cat looked up and met his eyes. She noticed his unusually blue irises and the shadow that flickered in them. She made no move. Showing her animagus form to first years on day one was a perfect way to pique their interest. Loren's vision faded and he sat down as if nothing had happened. Hermione was already there, in a middle seat, flipping through the Transfiguration textbook. "Did you see that cat on the podium?" Loren leaned over. "It was there before I came," she said without looking up. "If I were you, I'd review instead of chatting." "It's still early. You've nearly memorized the book already. Go pet the cat." Loren grinned mischievously. Hermione glanced at the cat, tempted despite herself. Nervous energy made her keep flicking pages. "Look at that tabby. Its fur's so sleek and well-behaved. If no one's around, stroking it a few times would be nice." Loren's expression was gleefully wicked. Under his prompting, Hermione rose and stroked the tabby, petted its head, then quickly returned, flustered by the unfamiliarity. Loren sat up straight. "How was it? Not bad, right?" Hermione smiled, looking more relaxed. "What do you think Professor McGonagall will teach today? I expect theory, basic principles, or perhaps a simple transfiguration spell." The mischievous part of Loren was already impatient, but he kept a straight face. "I don't know, but I haven't memorized the text either, so I should." He pretended to cough. "All right, no more talking." Harry and Ron arrived late, having dawdled at breakfast and been waylaid by the staircases. Hermione gave them a disapproving look. Then the tabby on the lectern shifted back into Professor McGonagall in her stern human form, and Hermione went pale, speechless. Loren shrugged, trying not to laugh out loud. After admonishing the latecomers, Professor McGonagall began her lesson. What you saw was an animagus, an advanced form of transfiguration. It allows a person to assume the form of a suitable animal and accomplish things humans cannot. The class erupted in excited chatter. "I want to become a lion. A true Gryffindor animagus should be a lion. An eagle would be amazing. You could fly. Would Slytherins be snakes?" The conversation veered all over. "Quiet." Professor McGonagall lifted her wand. The lectern twisted. One end lengthened into a tail, the other thickened into a pig's head. As the legs rounded into trotters, the lectern completed its transformation into a large, squealing pig. The students fell silent, wide-eyed at the demonstration. McGonagall then tapped the pig, and her stern gaze swept the room as if to say, "Anyone who misbehaves will share this fate." She explained that transfiguration rested on deep theory and required long practice. Then she handed each student a matchstick and had them attempt to turn it into a needle. Hermione didn't speak to Loren the entire exercise. She practiced the wand movement over and over, and the matchstick began to show real change. Loren leaned over and whispered, "Before you wave, picture the needle clearly, length, thinness, where the tip is." Hermione ignored him and flicked her wand with force. The sharp swish made Loren feel as if she wanted to thump him. Eventually, she shaped the matchstick into something needle-like, still thick, but unmistakably needle-shaped. "Hermione Granger is making rapid progress and deserves 5 points," Professor McGonagall said with a rare smile. Hermione visibly relaxed. McGonagall demonstrated a few more transformations and highlighted key points. After class, she called, "Loren Morgan, come to my office tonight." Loren's heart sank. Had his prank been noticed? There was no one here to turn a blind eye. The afternoon herbology lesson with Professor Sprout was light and interesting and passed quickly, but Hermione still didn't speak to him. That evening, Loren knocked on the little study near the second-floor corridor, Professor McGonagall's office. "Come in," came her voice. Inside, McGonagall was marking papers. Loren took a stool and waited. After a moment, she looked up, rose, and said, "Come with me. We'll go see Headmaster Dumbledore." "Professor McGonagall, it was only a prank. Surely it doesn't warrant seeing the headmaster?" Loren protested as he followed her. She kept a composed face, silent on the way, determined to teach him a lesson. She led him to the 3rd floor and paused before a huge stone gargoyle. "Sherbet lemon," she said. The gargoyle swung aside and the wall split open to reveal a spiral staircase that rose like a slow-moving escalator. They climbed until they stood before a gleaming oak door with a brass griffin knocker. Once inside, Dumbledore sat waiting, his white beard prominent in the warm light. "Mr. Morgan, a pleasure to meet you," Dumbledore said. Loren, never losing his composure, made himself at ease and sat. "Oh, Headmaster Dumbledore, I've heard so much about you." They both laughed easily. Dumbledore reached under his desk, produced a small box of sweets, and handed it to Loren. "With young people around, an old man like me feels a bit younger." Loren understood this probably wasn't a prelude to expulsion. He took a sweet without hesitation and popped it into his mouth. "Then perhaps you'll visit the common room more often and tell us stories." Dumbledore smiled at Loren's boldness. "Professor McGonagall told me about you. Hogwarts often runs across extraordinarily talented students." Loren blinked. Was mischief a sign of talent? McGonagall, standing nearby, explained, "Loren has unusual eyes. He can see things most people cannot." "Yes, Professor McGonagall mentioned a student who could see apparition points," Dumbledore said. "This morning he seemed to see through my animagus as well, so I thought you should come to me." Loren realized that was the purpose of the summons. He began to recount carefully what he'd seen. "Before apparition, I saw a kind of warp in space, like a blur." He hesitated, then added, "This morning I saw a red glow on the cat on the lectern that felt familiar. That's how I guessed it." McGonagall chimed in, "And then he used that to play a trick on poor Miss Granger, which unsettled her for the whole class." Dumbledore laughed kindly. The three of them talked at length. Dumbledore and McGonagall explained that many people in the world possessed unusual magical talents, some inherited through bloodlines, like the allure of a vila, others self-awakened, like metamorphmagi or seers. Neither could say precisely what Loren's sight signified. Dumbledore promised to look through some materials and consult old friends, and to tell Loren what he discovered. They talked long enough to finish the box of sweets. As McGonagall suggested it was time to leave, Loren spoke up. "Oh, one more thing, Headmaster. I also saw some strange scenes I think I should tell you about." 15. Conversation with Dumbledore. "Of course, I'd be happy to listen." Dumbledore glanced toward the door and signaled Professor McGonagall to go back and rest. She didn't mind and turned to leave. New students often made dramatic proclamations, discovering moving suits of armor or secret passages behind paintings. Even if there were a genuine discovery, the headmaster told himself he couldn't possibly take on all the work alone. He rummaged under the desk for another box of sweets, though it wasn't a box of cockroach clusters. His supply was small, and he liked to save a few for himself. Loren began by telling Dumbledore what he'd seen at the sorting ceremony, the strange dark shape that had appeared at the same time on Harry's scar and on Professor Snape's arm, and the oddness of Professor Quirrell's turban. He had his suspicions. Snape's arm bore an indelible black mark. Harry's scar contained a fragment of Voldemort's soul. There were other things he couldn't say, little unspeakable secrets he wasn't ready to voice. Dumbledore's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Snape's condition needed no explanation. Harry's situation sounded worse than he had thought. And Quirrell, since his return from Albania, there had been an increasing smell about him, and that extra turban looked more a clumsy concealment than any true fashion. Dumbledore seemed to be thinking through a plan of his own. He believed the right trap would make whatever was hiding show itself. Loren, you have an extraordinary gift, not just in your eyes. Dumbledore watched Loren pop a lemon sherbet into his mouth. Loren stood with his mouth half open, surprised. Did he really have some talent he hadn't noticed? Dumbledore smiled. Willing to share a secret with someone you've only just met, perhaps because I'm the headmaster, is a rare quality. Trust like that is not given lightly. He went on about Loren's eyes. Magical perception is a deep skill. Some students don't develop it until they leave school. You're far ahead of most. Can you see those strange things as well? Loren asked. Dumbledore's lips curved. Perhaps not as clearly, but I can see some. Is animagus one of them? What about apparition? Loren blurted, curious. Dumbledore only chuckled and said, That's a secret, giving him a conspiratorial smile. Did you notice that Ron Weasley's rat was strange too? Loren pressed, anxious to move the conversation along. Oh, the Weasley boy. I hadn't even realized he kept a pet rat. I'm more familiar with their parents, Arthur and Molly. He trailed off, caught himself, and added, One grows fond of old memories as one gets older. Let's talk about the rat, Loren urged, swallowing his candy. The first time I saw that rat, it looked like what Professor McGonagall turns into. Dumbledore's face grew serious. You mean it might be an animagus? I think so. Loren explained what he knew. That rat has been with the Weasleys for over 10 years. It used to belong to Percy. A wizard hiding in someone else's home is not to be taken lightly, Dumbledore said, a note of authority in his voice. Should we go and catch it? Not yet. We shouldn't alarm him. If an evil wizard has been living with the Weasleys for 10 years, we can't be certain what, if anything, he has done. If he has laid a curse or caused harm to Ron or the family, that would be grievous. The world of magic was full of strange curses and dark arts. 10 years could be plenty of time to do real damage. Dumbledore was right to be worried. But Loren wanted to tell him everything he knew, but he couldn't. Dumbledore took his hesitation for eagerness and smiled. I have a small task for you. He waved his wand. A tiny star streaked in from the window and settled into his palm, a warm yellow light hovering above his skin. Loren noticed Dumbledore's hand was a little rough, but not particularly wrinkled. It was thick and strong, more like a man in his 40s than someone feeble with age. Dumbledore offered his hand to Loren. Loren held out his, and the little star landed in his palm. Its light sank into his skin like the moon into a still lake, leaving a coin-sized four-pointed star pattern glowing faintly in his hand. I need you to attach this to that rat without anyone noticing, Dumbledore said, winking. Loren took the task in a daze. Dumbledore added nothing more. Only later, walking down the corridor, did Loren realize how little he had been told, how cleverly the headmaster had set him to work without explaining the whole plan. He muttered, So cunning, to himself. It was still candlelit in the corridors. Filch and Madame Norris wouldn't begin patrols for a while. That evening, the Gryffindor password was Pig's Snout. In the common room, Ron sat near the fire, teaching Harry Wizard's chess. Hermione was reading, though she glanced up and then away when Loren entered. She didn't trust everything he'd done, but she didn't want him expelled either. Harry called Loren over to join them, but Loren had other things to do. Ron, remember when you wanted to turn your rat yellow on the train? He said. I was asking Professor McGonagall some questions about transfiguration. Can I borrow Scabbers for a moment? Ron hesitated. He was fond of his pet, but when Loren offered a handful of lemon sherbets, even Ron couldn't refuse. Scabbers was asleep, unreactive as Loren picked him up. He was a little bigger than the palm of Loren's hand, his fur thin enough that Loren could feel the warm flesh beneath. For a moment, Loren had a strange, unsettling impulse, as if a hard squeeze could force the rat's bones out of its skin. He breathed out and shook the thought away. He mouthed the words he'd learned from Professor McGonagall. Daisies, sweet butter, and sunshine. Turn this fat rat yellow. Scabbers didn't stir. Loren returned him to Ron. Doesn't seem to work. That charm was dodgy on the train, Ron said. I don't think any of us could do it. Ron popped a lemon sherbet into his mouth and offered a few to Harry. Let's play wizard's chess. You two go on, I'll just watch, Loren said, settling down near the fire. He glanced at his hand. Where the star had been, there was nothing but smooth skin. The four-pointed mark was gone. The first week, the little wizards were kept incredibly busy. First-year courses at Hogwarts weren't numerous, and the first assignments were fairly simple. Most of their time was spent learning the castle's layout, especially the peculiar staircases, which behaved differently at different times of day. One morning, Loren had figured out that after turning right, he should turn left. Trying that rule at noon, he found himself trapped on a chaotic stairwell for nearly 15 minutes. It was common to see first years circling on the stairs. Neville suffered the worst of it. He'd already written home asking for a remembrall. When the new students asked older ones for directions, they were told it was Hogwarts tradition to find your own way. The Weasley twins bragged about secret passages they'd explored, some useful for getting to class or sneaking out at night. Loren remembered there was one near the Hufflepuff common room. A portrait scratched the right way would open a passage straight to the kitchens. There was also the Room of Requirement on the 8th floor, but he hadn't had occasion to try that yet. Herbology met 3 times a week, rotating between houses, and their session was that morning. In the greenhouse behind the castle, the first years, under Professor Sprout's eye, were transplanting a foul-smelling fungus. Loren and Hermione were paired. Hermione had her textbook practically memorized and listened intently in class. Loren relied on her, and they finished quickly, working well together. Not many students wanted Hermione's instruction, so she was in good spirits and couldn't resist a little lecturing. If you'd give up that nasty, mischievous habit, we could be friends, she scolded. I'll try, Loren said, his voice firm at first, then weakening. But sometimes I just can't help it. So you already knew that the cat was Professor McGonagall, and you did it on purpose to get me, Hermione began, then fell silent. Loren put on an innocent face. I didn't. Don't be ridiculous. Annoyed, Hermione squeezed Loren's muddy face with both hands. The child's skin, plump and soft, gave under her fingers. Hey, don't, Loren protested, but he was in the wrong and didn't dare fight back. Hermione remembered Professor McGonagall having called Loren to her office. Did she lecture you last night? No, we talked about things I can't tell you yet. You'll find out later. Loren didn't invent more excuses. Hermione was curious, but clever enough not to press. The matter ended there. At lunch, Loren saw Professor McGonagall call Percy and the Weasley twins into her office. An older student guessed it was because the twins had been up to mischief again. Ron couldn't help but laugh, enjoying the moment with true sibling mischief and affection. Afternoon Charms was with Professor Phileas Flitwick, head of Ravenclaw. He was so short he had to stand on a stack of books to reach his desk. When Harry's name was called during roll call, Flitwick was so delighted he nearly toppled off his books. Harry Potter, the famous Harry Potter. Flitwick had lived through Voldemort's dark days. He trusted Dumbledore, was grateful to Harry for what had happened, and admired Harry's parents. Harry blushed at the attention. After that display, other students tended to underestimate the little professor, but when Flitwick began to teach, none of them could. He could answer any question about charms and explain the origins of spells. The first lesson began with Lumos. Only a few managed to produce even a faint thread of light from their wand tips. Hermione's was brightest, earning Gryffindor 5 points. Though she was a Gryffindor, Hermione quickly became one of Flitwick's favorites. Loren kept quiet, not wanting to stand out so early. While idling, he chatted with the few people he'd already met and got along fine. Harry grasped the theory, only vaguely at first, but quickly realized he wasn't the only one floundering and stopped worrying. He couldn't imagine how miserable life at the Dursleys would be if he truly failed. Ron's wandwork sputtered because of his broken wand, its core revealed with a strand of unicorn hair, yet he still managed enough magic to keep up. Neville trailed the class, but did well in herbology. Caring for plants required patience more than flair, and Neville had plenty of that. Seamus lived up to his reputation as an explosion-prone student. Even the Lumos practice left his desk scorched black. Hermione instructed everyone relentlessly about wand movement and incantation. It made others uncomfortable, and except for Loren, she didn't make many friends. Loren didn't mind. He knew she meant well and tolerated her guidance while quietly enjoying her exasperation. On Wednesday night, they learned to use telescopes, naming stars and tracing planet paths. Most treated it as entertainment. The most anticipated class was Defense Against the Dark Arts. Everyone was curious about strange creatures and eerie magic and hoped to learn useful protective charms. Professor Quirrell's first lesson, however, descended into farce. The classroom reeked of garlic, and Quirrell was mocked until he could barely keep control. Potion class was Friday. The dungeon classroom was colder than the rest of the castle, cabinets of glass jars filled with preserved creatures lining the walls. Loren's feelings about Professor Snape were complicated. Snape was undoubtedly brilliant, but their history left a residue of regret. Meeting him had led to mistakes Loren wished he could undo, and some things felt irredeemable. Still, he needed to stay in Snape's good graces. He needed access to a wolfsbane potion. Bates' wolfsbane depended on that connection, and it would be better to learn to brew it himself. If not, he might have to buy it from Snape, though he had no idea what the price would be. There was talk that the Half-Blood Prince's notebook had been stowed at the back of this very classroom. Loren wanted to look for it eventually, but at the start of term, it seemed wise not to attract too much attention. Earlier that morning, at breakfast in the Great Hall, Loren had sat next to Harry. "Harry, did you look at 1,000 magical herbs and fungi?" Loren asked, his face eager for mischief. "I flipped through it before school started, but didn't read it carefully," Harry admitted. "Why? Is there a test before potions?" "I don't know if there'll be a test, but I see a dark omen on your forehead. Today might not be smooth for you." Loren's tone grew mockingly solemn. Hermione frowned. "What kind of magic is that? I've never seen it." They were interrupted by the post. At Hogwarts, owls flew in through the skylights during meals and dropped letters and parcels onto plates. Hedwig, white and dignified, landed in front of Harry and left a note. Loren couldn't resist picking her up and stroking her. Hedwig tried to flap free, but quickly grew subdued under promises of jam and sweets. Hermione watched enviously and petted the owl too. Harry read the note. It was from Hagrid. "Dear Harry, I know you have no classes Friday afternoon, so could you come over for tea about 3 o'clock? I'd love to hear how your first week's gone. Please send Hedwig back with a reply." "Hagrid, Ron, Loren, want to come with me to see a friend on Friday?" Harry asked, folding the note away. "Hagrid is keeper of keys and grounds. He lives near the Forbidden Forest and's a kindly giant." "We get to see the Forbidden Forest," Ron crowed. Loren liked the idea too, a good place to practice magic away from prying eyes. Both agreed, and Harry wrote a reply. Hedwig flew off to deliver it. Loren tucked the thought of the Half-Blood Prince's notebook in the back of his mind for later. For now, the first week at Hogwarts had been a whirlwind of new rules, new friends, and 1,000 secrets just waiting to be explored. Harry Potter. Professor Snape sounded briefly absent-minded as he called the name. "Here," Harry answered. Snape's eyes flicked to him. They were green behind the round spectacles, catching the dim dungeon light like a shard of emerald glass in the dark. For a heartbeat, it might have been Lily looking back at him. He felt the old grief like a physical thing, how he had wanted to apologize, how youth and pride had pushed them apart, how careless words had driven her away. There had been time then, perhaps, to make things right. He had wanted to prove himself, to show what he could do, and instead he had driven her over the edge. Life was so final. He would gladly have exchanged his life to bring her back, but some losses were permanent. The world had a way of becoming a little colder for that. And yet he could not simply die. He had to atone, to make certain people pay. Snape steadied himself against the workbench and looked at the next name on his list. Only Loren noticed the small change in him. When Snape's gaze settled on Loren as well, Loren wondered if Dumbledore had warned the staff about Scabbers. It seemed impossible that the professors would not be told there might be a dark wizard or something dangerous in the school. After counting the students, Snape began the usual introduction to his subject. "In my class, you will not wave your wands, nor utter incantations," he said in that low, disdainful tone. "I do not expect many of you to understand the subtle art and exact science of potions. However, for the few who possess the talent, I can teach you to bewitch the mind and ensnare the senses. I can teach you to bottle fame, brew glory, even stop death itself." It was the same speech he likely gave to every first year, but it still held its dark charm. Harry, sitting beside Ron, wrote the lines into his notebook. The boy thought the professor unfriendly, but the words were worth recording. Snape watched Harry scribbling, head bent, an independent posture that reminded him irritatingly of James Potter. Annoyance curled coldly in his chest. "Perhaps some people at Hogwarts think their fame is everything," Snape continued. "They think they do not need to listen." His voice sharpened. "Potter, tell me, what would you get if you added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry started. He shared a helpless look with Ron. Slytherin faces around the room brightened with nasty satisfaction. Their head of house would enjoy this, while the Gryffindors looked caught off guard. Hermione practically glowed with the urge to answer. She had her hand halfway up before she even thought about it. "I don't know, sir," Harry said honestly. Snape stared at him as if he were trying to see through the boy. "So fame does not explain everything. Then another question. If you were looking for a bezoar, where would you begin?" Hermione shot her hand up high. Harry shrugged. "I don't know, sir." "And the difference between wolfsbane and aconite?" Loren and Ron glanced at Harry with pity. Hermione was desperate to answer, but kept her hand rigidly raised, not daring to stand. Harry, feeling increasingly cornered and a little resigned, repeated, "I don't know, sir." "How disappointing," Snape said, with all the theatrical cruelty of an insult. "All show and no substance, Mr. Potter." There was a small, almost private pleasure in his tone. Harry's temper flared. Hermione knows the answers. Not letting her answer is the real shame. Some students laughed. Snape's expression cut across the room like a blade. "Quiet." The laughter died at once under that single soft command. Hermione clenched her hand, unable to contain herself. Snape moved toward her, and the scrape of his footsteps made everything feel colder. "Put your hand down, you silly girl," he said. Hermione's face fell, and she lowered her arm. Snape turned his stare to Loren. "Some people have a little talent and are equally conceited." Dumbledore had told him of Loren's unusual eyes. Snape had been preparing for the animagus who had lived unnoticed in the Weasley household for years, spending late nights brewing specific potions. Loren blinked, puzzled. Why single him out? His eyes weren't green like Potter's. "Loren Morgan," Snape delivered. "You will answer." Loren had expected Snape to make things difficult for Potter on the first potions lesson, but he had no memory of the precise questions, so he could not have warned Harry in advance. Still, he had read the potions textbook carefully before term began and had studied sections on alchemy and wolfsbane. He answered clearly, "Powdered root of asphodel combined with wormwood produces the drought of living death." "A bezoar," he continued, "is found in a goat's stomach. Aconite and wolfsbane are the same plant, commonly called aconite." They were not profound answers, merely exact ones. Snape's opportunity vanished. He ignored Loren and turned on the rest of the class. "Why haven't you written all of this down?" Quills started scratching across parchment. Over the noise, Snape added, "Potter spoke back to a professor. Gryffindor will lose 5 points." A few Gryffindors scowled. Points were rarely added when someone answered correctly, yet they were quick to be taken away. Loren felt nothing particular about the deduction. To survive here, one needed background and influence. A few lost points would not affect the House Cup. 18. Confused Harry Potion class dragged on, and Professor Snape's treatment of the Gryffindors was as harsh as ever. Students worked in pairs on a simple boil treatment potion that required weighing dried nettles, crushing snake fangs, and boiling horned slugs. Snape singled out Malfoy for praise when the blonde boy performed each step perfectly. The most dangerous part, according to the book, was adding porcupine quills. If done wrong, it would cause great trouble. Soon, everyone would see what that meant. Neville and Seamus, working together, added the quills without first taking the cauldron off the fire. A stream of acidic green smoke shot up from the cauldron, which collapsed into a ball. The potion sloshed out across the stone floor, hissing corrosively. Those nearest leapt onto their stools. A few who were slower ended up with holes burned through their shoes. No one was badly hurt, except Neville. The potion splashed his arms and thighs, eating through his clothes. Wherever it touched his skin, red, swollen blisters bloomed. Neville crouched on the floor, howling, hands trying to cover the wounds, but only making the pain worse as pus oozed out. Loren and Ron watched helplessly. Snape stalked forward, eyes fixed on Neville with a fierceness that made the classroom freeze. He waved his wand and cleared the spilled potion away. Then, with swift, clipped motions, he cast several healing spells that quieted Neville's cries. From his robes, he produced a small black bottle and poured out a single drop of white, sap-like liquid. He mixed it into the boil potion and applied it to Neville's blisters. The swelling shrank fast until only pink marks remained. Neville reached out to touch them and flinched. When Snape finished, he finally spoke, scolding in a voice as cold as ever. "You idiot! I suppose you put the porcupine quills in without taking the cauldron off the fire, didn't you?" Neville sobbed and sniffled under the reprimand. "Send him to the hospital wing. I've only done temporary treatment. Madame Pomfrey will need to see him again." Snape sounded impatient as he handed the command to Seamus, who helped Neville to his feet and escorted him out. Hermione bit her lip, lingering with fear and anger. That was terrifying. There are no safety measures at all in these practical classes. Loren, who had only seen the potions class in films and had been startled by the sudden accident, tried to reassure her. "It was an accident. Everyone will be more careful now." One by one, the other students climbed down from their stools and sat back at their benches. A few muttered that Snape had shown himself a true potions master. Harry hadn't yet recovered from the fright when Snape's voice cut through the room again. "Potter, why didn't you tell them not to add the porcupine quills? Do you think his mistake makes you look better?" Gryffindor, another 5 points. Harry felt a dull ache in his chest. He didn't know the old feud between his parents and Snape, and had no idea why the potions master disliked him so intensely. An hour later, the lesson finally ended. After lunch, the trio went to meet Hagrid, walking across the fields. The sun was warm and generous, and their spirits lifted after the tension of potions. Loren, who had spent recent years in the wilds, breathed in the open air with obvious pleasure. He ran a few paces, plucked at grasses and wildflowers, and the others joined in, caught up by his easy enthusiasm. At 5 minutes to 3, they reached Hagrid's small wooden hut at the edge of the forbidden forest. A crossbow and a pair of rubber boots sat by the door. Loren felt an immediate affection for the place and was the first to rap on the door. It opened a crack to reveal a large, bearded face. Hagrid hesitated when he saw Loren, then broke into a wide grin at the sight of Harry behind him. "Oh, come in quick. I was so busy I'd clean forgot our appointment." He pulled his hound back a little and ushered the trio inside. The hut was a single room. Hams and pheasants hung from the beams, a copper kettle bubbled over a brazier, and a patched quilt covered the bed in the corner. It looked more ramshackle than Loren's home. "Sit down, don't be shy," Hagrid beckoned, then let his hound loose. The dog hurtled toward Ron, who nearly squealed, but Fang's only greeting was an enthusiastic lick to the ear. Hagrid laughed. "Forgot to introduce Ye. This is Fang." The dog was all bark and cuddles rather than menace. Harry and Loren chuckled at Ron's bedraggled state. Harry introduced his friends. "This is Ron and Loren," Hagrid chuckled. "Another Weasley, eh? Your brothers gave me no end of trouble. Took me half me life to chase 'em out of the forest." He pressed rock cakes into their hands. The cakes thumped onto the plate and felt weighty. Ron and Harry bit into theirs with bravado. The first crunch made their faces fold, rock cakes that could practically break teeth. Still, with polite smiles, they chewed on, pretending they enjoyed them. Loren, holding his cake, understood why Fang liked them. Dogs loved things to sink their teeth into. Conversation turned to Hogwarts' moving staircases, and then Harry began ranting about his classes, especially Snape's favoritism and constant needling. Hagrid stammered a little, as if he wanted to disagree, but at last offered, "Snape is a professor. He wouldn't be out to get you." The answer sounded unconvincing. Hagrid cleared his throat and asked about Ron's brother. "How's Charlie doing? He's a natural with creatures like me." The topic shifted too abruptly. Ron brightened and talked about Charlie, now working with dragons after graduation. Loren picked up the Daily Prophet from the table and skimmed it. Harry noticed an article about the Gringotts break-in. A vault had been breached. The bank insisted nothing was taken because the vault's owner had withdrawn everything earlier that day, and a goblin spokesperson refused to disclose what had been stored and warned others not to interfere. Loren read the piece and had his own thoughts. He suspected Dumbledore had laid a trap for Lord Voldemort. He was also irritated by the goblin's statement. How could a place that safeguarded other people's valuables be broken into and then shrug it off, warning customers not to ask questions? It seemed outrageous. Then Harry remembered, heart-pounding. "Hagrid, we were there the day Gringotts was broken into." Hagrid glanced around and avoided answering directly, an odd little movement Harry tucked away in his mind. Could the small package Hagrid had taken from Vault 713 that day have been what the intruders sought? Time slipped by. The rock cake and an afternoon of tea went unfinished. Loren had slipped one to Fang when no one was looking. Harry sat with a head full of questions. What had been in that package Hagrid took, where it was now, and why Hagrid had hesitated when Snape was mentioned. 19. Spots show their true colors. It was a Saturday morning. The first years drifted through the castle or lay sunning themselves by the lake. There wasn't much work to worry about yet. In the Gryffindor common room, the new housemates had gathered to map out the staircase patterns, Hermione doing most of the explaining, Neville dutifully copying almost every word into his notebook, even keeping a list of common room passwords. Loren and his roommates had fallen into a habit. If Neville wasn't seen before bedtime, they'd open the common room door and find him waiting just outside. Ron kept Scabbers in his pocket. Lately, the rat had been sleeping more and more, all day except for the occasional bite of food. Ron had wondered if something was wrong. Harry listened as they argued about the quickest routes to classes and recalled Professor McGonagall's sharp rebuke the day before. "Perhaps if I turned the two of you into pocket watches, you would be more punctual," she'd snapped. Harry could still hear the chill in her voice. He didn't want to be on the receiving end of that again. At that moment, Percy returned with Fred and George, striding straight for Ron. Percy looked pale and said nothing. The twins each grabbed an arm of Ron's and began to lead him away, speaking together in mock sympathy. "Oh, poor little Ronnie. He still doesn't know what happened." Ron was bewildered. The twins carried him a little way before he started shouting, "Let go of me! Be careful! I'll tell Mum, and you'll be in so much trouble." Percy trailed behind them, motioning for Loren and Harry to follow, but he didn't explain. Loren and Harry exchanged looks. Loren had an inkling of what it might be, but kept silent. Those left in the common room thought the Weasleys were playing a joke and laughed as the group walked out. Outside the headmaster's office, Professor McGonagall waited, holding a glass jar. The twins put Ron down. "Report. Mission accomplished," they announced together. McGonagall waved her wand at Ron's pocket. Scabbers floated out of it and dropped into the jar. The glass instantly sealed into a sphere with only a small air hole. Ron stared in disbelief. "Merlin's beard. You did all that for a rat?" "Mom and Dad are in the headmaster's office," the twins said. "Come on." Harry and Ron, full of questions, followed them in. Loren noticed that all the portraits in the headmaster's office had turned their faces inward. Even from the doorway, he could tell something serious was going on. Professor Snape stood in a corner like a dark blot, while Dumbledore was trying to comfort Mr. and Mrs. Weasley. It was Loren's and Harry's first time meeting Ron's parents. They both had the Weasley look, red hair and freckled faces. Arthur Weasley was tall and thin, spectacles perched on his nose, fretting, "I should have noticed. It's my fault." Molly Weasley, rounder and more tremulous, was sobbing, "My poor Ronnie, that damn dark wizard." When the group entered, Molly leapt up and rushed to Ron, hugging him fiercely. "Thank Merlin you're all right," she kept whispering. She was still shaking. Ron, stunned, hugged her back quietly. Arthur came forward too. Dumbledore, who had been urging calm, relaxed into a smile only when he saw all the children safe. He noticed Harry and his scar. "You must be Harry," he said. "You've grown a great deal." Molly turned to Harry and reached out as if to touch his face, then changed her mind and hugged him instead. "Poor child," she murmured. Dumbledore next introduced Loren. "This is Loren," he said. "He has a keen eye for discovery. Thanks to him, we would have remained in the dark." Everyone in the Weasley family, except Ron, looked at Loren with grateful smiles. Professor Snape's expression was a study in cold contempt as he cut across the emotion. "Now, let's see the true face of this rat from the gutter." McGonagall tipped the jar and let Scabbers tumble onto the floor. Dumbledore raised his ancient wand. A four-pointed star of light appeared, and a yellow glow spread over the little creature. The rat swelled and elongated until, as the light faded, where a rat had been stood a balding, somewhat portly man with gray-streaked hair. Harry felt his scar throb, a quick, sharp ache that was almost gone as soon as it arrived. Loren watched the man and felt an odd, inexplicable familiarity, the kind you get from having seen something on stage or screen before. Percy and Ron went pale. Ron felt sick. He'd loved that pet rat, kissed it, even slept with it tucked under his chin. Now it had turned into a greasy, balding, middle-aged man. Professor McGonagall's voice was a gasp. "Pettigrew?" she said, recognizing him as her former student. Snape's voice, all venom, followed. "Unbelievable. 10 years ago, Pettigrew was blown up by his own friend. Only a finger remained. I never thought he'd been hiding at the Weasleys for 10 years. Images flickered through Loren's mind. An exploded roof, a street ripped apart, the memory of a sky-blue dress. Vague, disconnected fragments with no clear source. Someone murmured, "There must be more to it. A potion might force the truth." "Freshly brewed veritaserum, just a few drops," someone added. Dumbledore frowned, thoughtful, then shook his head. "Peter once received the Order of Merlin, first class. People regarded him as a hero. We cannot simply force the truth out of him. Professor McGonagall, notify the Ministry of Magic. There is another person involved in the events of that year." From the moment Loren had mentioned that an animagus had been hiding in the Weasley household for over a decade, Dumbledore had begun to move. He had invoked a charm to pin the man in place so he could not flee or act out. He asked McGonagall to confirm with Percy and the twins that all the Weasleys were safe and to inform the Ministry. What had been intended as a lesson on dark wizards for Harry had suddenly become something more complex. There might be parts of that year's story that even Dumbledore did not yet understand. He promised Mr. and Mrs. Weasley that he and the staff would take care of the rest and ask them to wait for news. Arthur and Molly, in their relief, trusted him without question. The children left the office stunned. McGonagall granted the Weasley twins 2 days' leave to recover. They were to return on Monday. Molly invited Harry and Loren to spend the weekend at the Burrow, but both boys agreed it would be better not to intrude on the family's reunion. Harry still had so many questions. He wanted to ask Dumbledore about the things Hagrid had not finished telling him about his parents. Did the Weasleys know his parents? Who was this dark wizard, really? Had Loren known anything beforehand? He decided he would ask Loren properly when they had a moment. This is where the plot begins to deviate. I always felt something was off in the writing here. My foreshadowing seemed too dry, so I revised this part. If you've read this far, I hope you'll tell me what you think. 20. Explosive genius. Passion is burning. By lunch, Ron had already gone off with Mr. and Mrs. Weasley. Loren felt that since things had gotten this far, he could leave the rest to Dumbledore. After he told the headmaster about the situation, he didn't involve himself any further. Harry, bread in his mouth, started to ask, "Loren, was it you who found out?" Bang! A sudden explosion rang out nearby. Seamus's face was streaked black with soot, his hair sticking up in every direction, looking ridiculous. Dean Thomas beside him laughed so hard, his teeth showed like a row of white flags. Dean, a black Gryffindor, was Seamus's good friend. He always laughed the loudest at scenes like this. It wasn't the first time. Seamus had a habit of blowing things up when trying new charms. The blasts were never powerful enough to hurt anyone, but his face always ended up scorched. Loren, holding a chicken leg, strolled over, delighted. "What charm was that?" he asked. "He tried to turn clear water into wine," Dean said between chuckles, "but it exploded again." Loren gave Seamus a look that said, You lucky boy, I have the perfect trick to teach you. Seamus, have you ever thought you might have a knack for this sort of thing? Seamus wiped his face with a handkerchief and rolled his eyes. If you want it, I can trade talents with you. Loren grinned. I've got a brilliant little charm that suits you perfectly. Can I try it too? Dean piped up, curiosity overriding mockery. They finished their lunch quickly and, arm in arm, made their way to the edge of the forbidden forest. Harry watched them leave, a little exasperated. He hadn't even finished his question. Across the hall, Draco Malfoy smirked at him from the Slytherin table. Look at that! Famous Harry Potter all abandoned and alone, he taunted. Harry was tired of Draco. The feud had started on the train, when Malfoy had looked down on Ron, and he seized every chance to needle Harry. Fortunately, the houses only shared potions as a class, Harry thought, and ignored him as he headed back to the common room. At the forest's edge, Seamus peered into the trees. Why are we here? Professors don't let us into the forbidden forest. Loren paced a little way in from the boundary and shook his head in satisfaction with the spot. That's exactly why. If anything's going to make a bit of a racket, this is the place. He gathered a few branches and fashioned a little makeshift door. Seamus and Dean looked puzzled. Loren stepped back and pointed his wand. Portaberto. He didn't cast it full force. The charm was clearly Portaberto, nothing mumbled or odd, and a finger-thick tongue of red light leapt from his wand to strike the crude wooden door. Boom! The branches flew apart, and a black scorch mark darkened the ground. Seamus and Dean exchanged wide-eyed looks and both managed, Cool. Dean leaned forward. What kind of magic is that? Does it run in your family? Seamus, still grinning, pretended modesty. This fits me. I could learn it. I want to learn too, Dean added eagerly. Loren rolled his eyes at the two boys who disliked studying. If either of you had read the Standard Book of Spells, you'd know this is just an old-fashioned opening charm. They heard only the last words. Seamus swung his arm dramatically. It opens doors, doesn't it? I'm learning it, I promise. No 11-year-old dislikes a little explosive fun, and Loren planned a kind of role-play with them. Quick, set up a few doors. You need targets to practice on. They used wood blocks, branches, and stones to make a rough circle, nearly 20 little doors in all. Loren taught them the important bits, pronunciation, intonation, and the proper flick of the wand. Then the edge of the forbidden forest filled with a chorus of attempts. Portaberto, Portaberto, Portaberto. Soon Seamus was blowing holes in the little doors. Dean could only manage a faint glow. I got it! I got it! Seamus cheered, euphoric. He had never picked up a charm so quickly and perfectly. Loren wasn't sure whether it was pure technique or Seamus's natural gift. Sometimes talent did the work for you, but Seamus had clearly learned something. Dean kept chanting, frustrated and impressed in equal measure. The two boys worked tirelessly. Seamus progressed from blasting ragged black scorch marks to forming tidy, regular openings that spread outward from the center. Dean at least had the wooden doors trembling with energy. Loren moved on to teach the corrected pronunciation and the crucial bit of visualization. Picture the target as a door you want to pass through. Seamus tried the new wording and, after a few awkward failures, succeeded in producing cleaner blasts. Encouraged, Loren and Seamus turned their attention to the surrounding trees, though Loren held back, not using full power. In truth, give a child a stick and a little skill, and suddenly, every blade of grass and tree looks like a target. They darted about, making little explosions with delighted cries. Whoosh! Bang! Whoosh! Bang! Dean felt left out. He kept mumbling Portaberto through gritted teeth and tried to convince himself he wasn't jealous. They had probably been at it for a long while when a dog's bark cut through the air. Hagrid emerged from the trees with Fang, both of them covered in soot. The ground and tree trunks around him were scorched. Hagrid's face was smudged black, but luckily, no animals had been hurt. "Which house are ye lot from?" he asked gruffly. It's us, Hagrid." Seeing Loren, he remembered he was a friend of Harry's. He glanced at the Gryffindor badges on their robes and shook his head. Of course, only Gryffindors would get up to this sort of thing, he muttered, with a touch of self-recognition in his voice. He reached out, grabbed Seamus and Dean by the collars, and hoisted them up. "Come on, both o' ye. I'll find summat for ye to do." He looked at Loren. "You come along, too."